Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. It isn't gone from the world. Get back here. The three mages ran, ignoring the cries of anger behind them. Hibiki quickly glanced backwards before suddenly ducking, a stream of fire shooting through the air where his head had been. Without hesitating, Hibiki whipped his hand out, a screen rapidly appearing behind him and exploding. A cry of pain told him all he needed to know, but not one of them slowly down. They couldn't afford getting caught out in the open and be delayed. Who knew how many people would have heard that man's shouts? Wendy suddenly stumbled, falling towards the ground with a cry. Before she could hit the ground, Jura's hand shot out and grabbed her, holding on to her till she managed to get back onto her feet properly. "Thank you," she said as she ran back along them, her breathing more even than their own due to her Sky Dragon Slayer magic. Jura nodded in acknowledgement while Hibiki smiled encouragingly, and then they were all back to silence, nothing on their minds but running. A cry of a horse sounds nearby and Hibiki smiled. "We're close. It's Christina. Don't let them escape." Jura sighed as a group of dark mages jumped out of the trees, all kinds of magic moving with them. Fire surrounded their group while lightning sparked and shot forward, followed closely by blasts of water and wind. Jura pushed the other two back before raising his hands in front of him. A wall of earth shot from the ground, the magic harmlessly impacting against the strength of the stone. Raising one foot upwards, Jura slammed it back against the ground, the rock wall shattered into small pieces. His hands slashed to the sides and the earth shot forward, taking down the group of mages with minimum effort. A large roar sounded close by, Jura glancing towards the origin of the sound. "Get to Christina. But dash. Go. I'll be fine." The other two mages looked uncertainly at them before giving the wizard saint a single nod. They quickly ran off ahead, Jura bringing his staff to the ready. He could sense them. They had to be close if he could feel the magic they were releasing. And then they burst through, a group of them on bikes. It took only a second for the group to realize he was alone, and some of them began splitting off to go after the others. Jura raised an arm, walls of earth blocking the path of the enemy mages and even destroying some of their bikes. Spikes burst from the wall, impaling a few while causing another group to lose their bikes. From the explosions that occurred, he doubted they would be getting up soon. They could even be dead. This wasn't time for remorse. There were more coming. He couldn't rest or afford to show mercy. He may have been a wizard saint, but there were limits to his power, and even if a lot were lost he could still be taken down if he didn't go at them with his full might. The remaining mages struggled to their feet and surrounding him, a lot of them generating fire magic from their hands. In unison the flames shot forward, working together to form a large torrent of flames. Jura watched the enclosing flames before slamming his staff into the ground, the earth rising rapidly below him to bring him above the flames. With one swift jump, he was over the flames, landing right in front of two of the mages. His staff shot round, impacting against the two and sending them flying. Another three jumped at him, but it only took a small shift of his hands and feet to launch pillars of earth at them. From each pillar, more pillars shot out from the sides of the others, forming a spider web-like structure of stone. Jura glanced around, seeing the rest of the mages had been disabled. Now where did that roar come from? His answer came from behind him above him as a green wyvern swooped down from above. Jura rolled to the side at the last moment, dodging the claws of the creature before stabbing forward with his staff. Most wouldn't have suspected the staff's motion to do much. So when the beast shattered into pieces, Jura used the moment to identify the location of all the gasps and outcries that he heard. He knew it. It was nothing more than a fake. He didn't believe a standard dark guild would have gotten a wyvern, even less that they managed to train one well enough. Picked magic was certainly useful with creativity, and it did make a great tool to frighten people. However, they were never a match for the original creation. You could only take the art so far when making it reality. Jura swiped out with his free hand, hearing the cries of pain as the earth exploded upwards and smashed against all the mages in hiding. And then he listened. Silence. There was no one left. Another cry sounded, but it was the sound of a horse once more. And it was closer. Looking upwards at the sky, Jura smiled as he saw the massive form of Christina. The earth shot him upwards, firing him towards the ship. The moment he was level, he rapidly stepped off, letting the earth fall back to the ground and crash into pieces. Jura. Jura smiled as he saw Wendy and Hibiki running towards him, Happy and Carla behind them. So you both made it safely then? Were there any troubles? Wendy shook her head. None. Happy and Carla got us out of there safely. I said Happy happily. Carla spotted them and flew to get them. I ended up following. The he cat is right, stated Carla. I couldn't risk leaving Wendy stranded down there, especially with all the ruckus and danger around her. Honestly, what were you thinking? Why didn't you send her back with Jalal? She can't fight very well. Carla, I'm fine. Look. Wendy made the cat look at her properly and Carla sighed, admitted her loss. See. Fine then, but you shouldn't have been exposed to so much danger. And it must have been tiring having to heal both Ichigo and Natsu. It wasn't that bad. Wendy smiled. I told you I'm better than before. You're just worried because of that time I tried to heal the master. Of course I would be worried. You fainted after a few moments of trying. It's why he told you never to heal him again. That was years ago. I'm much better now. You should be proud of her, added Jura. She saved 2 lives today, and with such ease too. Wendy blushed, looking down at her feet. It was nothing. I'm just glad I can do stuff like this. A cough sounded behind them, the group turning to see Ichigo waiting off at the side. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm afraid I will need to borrow Jura and Hibiki. Wendy, if you wouldn't mind, could you keep an eye of Ichigo? Sure. Wendy ran off quickly, the cats following after her to keep her company. Jura watched as she vanished inside before turning his attention towards Ichigo. So Natsu is already up. He's down in the hold with Ichigo but he's awake mostly. He'll likely run out the moment we give him a target, something that will likely happen sooner rather than later, men. And the others? The ladies are down in the hold too, resting for the time being. Urza is still out in the field somewhere, and so are Gray and Leon. I'd recommend extraction for them as quickly as possible. Gray and Leon are tough but numbers can still win, and I'm especially worried about Urza. She isn't at her best after all. Jalal. He left. He muttered something after he got a sudden headache. A single name. Urza. You think he regained his memories? No. Ichigo sighed. I think it was something that just broke through. A remnant of something he can't remember and so he's seeking out the source to find some answers. We'll have to let him be then. At least for now. What about the other members of your guild? Ichigo glanced forward towards the black light in the distance. Ren and Eve are downstairs at the weapons. This is also why I asked Wendy to go downstairs along with the others. They don't need to see or know about what we're about to do if possible. Sir. An archive screen appeared in front of them all. We've got 20 mages incoming. They'll likely try and target us soon. Good job Hibiki, Ichigo muttered, gesturing for the 2 mages to follow to the ship's helm. Ichigo grabbed the controls of the ship as Hibiki took a place in the center of the room, multiple archive screens forming around him. Accessing. Hibiki's voice was oddly cold, all expressions the man showed gone from his face. His eyes were even dull. 5 targets to the north. Firing solution being transferred to weapon systems. Cannons 3 through 7 are primed, ready for launch. 7 targets approaching in a scatter formation from a bearing of 201 degrees. Cannons 11 through 19 have been selected and are being prepped. Recommend use of explosive rounds for maximum effectiveness. Jura frowned, looking towards Ichigo questioningly. Why is wrong with him? Why is he so dead? Christina is our guild's pride and joy, but why did they send a ship like this with so few people who knew how to use it? And how do you accurately track and target the systems? Hibiki is the answer. He's connected to the ship's core, using his own mind to process all the available data he has and to control the ship's systems in response to that. But why does he seem so dead? Because he has to be. Emotions get in the way here. How do you classify an emotion in a world of data? He pushes them to one side and dives into the systems, becoming one with them. You could say that, at this moment in time, Hibiki is Christina. Ichiya glanced forward, pressing a control. An archive screen appeared in front of him in response to the action. These controls help contact him, asking for quick things we may need. I've called up a map here so we can see what is happening. Jura joined Ichiya by the controls, watching the map. 12 of the 20 red dots near them had been circled, and the other 8 had circles slowly forming around them at varying speeds. The last one finished drawing before Hibiki finally spoke again. All targets located. Requesting firing permission. Ichiya reached towards another set of controls, looking once at Jura. Don't think badly of me for these actions now. I don't like senseless slaughter like this, but we're at war right now. We have to reach Nirvana soon, and we can't let these dark guilds stop us. Jura's eyes didn't leave the map, instead nodding slowly. Do it. Ichiya pressed the button and nothing happened for a moment. And then blasts of magic shot towards the ground ahead of them, smashing into the terrain with ease. 5 red dots vanished instantly, and another 7 did when explosions sounded from behind them. Cannons fired again and again, until finally the few that avoided the first wave were no longer showing up on the archive map. How many have we taken out so far? Ichiya was silent for a moment, his eyes closed as his mouth muttering a few words almost in prey. We've taken out about 3 guilds I think, and there are 14 left. Some are bigger than others, and likely stronger too. But from my calculations, I'd say that there are about 2 or 3 missing from their actually numbers here. I don't know where they are. Jura sighed, looking out the window, noticing how very little light was still about. It's getting dark out there. A black night as an ancient weapon rises. Indeed. It feels more like an omen rather than a natural cycle of time. The two watched as the last rays of light disappeared, the only sounds being from when cannons burst to life from stopping new contacts. And as the last light disappeared, so did the pillar of black light, a massive stone city construct rising as the light vanished. Protector of the Fairies. Taoshiro watched the sight in front of him from a distance, his eyes cold as he observed the stone fortress rising. Was this Nirvana? He had heard nothing, but he had still stood there waiting, prepared for the moment he would be needed. When Ichigo rushed off, and then Shinji followed afterwards, he had wanted to abandon his post, rushing into battle to help them. Was that wrong to want to do such a thing? To help and fight beside those he cared for? But he had resisted, knowing exactly why he couldn't do just that. Out of all of them, he had the greatest skill with Kadu. Sure, Ichigo and Shinji could cast high-level spells, and he hadn't yet learned how to do some of the strong ones they could use, but he had one thing that made him essential. Control. A barrier Kadu was a powerful spell, capable of holding and sealing things away that would break many other methods. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to hold it at bay forever. He only had so much magic, and those types of spells required massive amounts of magic, far more than even Ichigo had at his disposal on his own. Control, however, was essential. You could have all the magical power in the world, but it meant nothing if you didn't understand how to shape it. He had the most experience out of all of them, and it was about to count. At the very least, if he didn't have to worry about anything, he could hold the spell he wanted to use up for a day. That should last long enough for help to arrive as Ichigo said it would. In the distance he could see Christina, and he had already calculated the area it was in. It would be trapped inside too, but that was hardly an issue. The barrier was going to be a very large one after all. He couldn't spare time to shrink the size of it. Looking back at what had to be Nirvana, Taoshiro couldn't help but be in awe of the sight. There was literally a massive city resting on the top of the Nirvana, 8 legs sprouting from the stone towards the ground. He closed his eyes and let his senses spread out towards the magic, feeling shock when he felt a trail of magic from the earth spreading upwards into the city. He hadn't ever seen or felt anything like it before. It almost seemed like it wasn't a dangerous weapon for a moment. Almost. Taoshiro clapped his hands together once and brought them apart, a rectangle of green light appearing between the two. As he brought his palms further apart, more appeared. With just a slight alteration of his posture, he sent the light flying forward in front of him, the green light changing to solid white wood while rapidly increasing in size to massive proportions. Toshiro looked at the first stage of his job. It was far easier to cast the spell like this and then reinforce it. It was far too hard and energy-consuming to cast the spell in one go, and he had the time to spare by using a trailing incantation with the spell anyway. Another useful trick with Barrier Kadu. Bringing his hands together in a pray form, he muttered the chant. Brethren in arms withdrawing for the distance of 8 sun and standing still, blue bolt, white bolt, black bolt, red bolt, sinking into the ocean together seeking redemption. His hands shot forward, the sides together and the palms facing the white wood ahead of him. Ryabai Nojuman. White wood appeared behind the originals, stacking up behind them and increasing the layers of the spell till it was a width of 6 of the giant planks. Blue tiles appeared about the wood and small sections dropped down a bit onto the wood itself to secure itself to it. Toshiro brought one arm back before swiping, a large blue beam of wood shooting across the back of the wall and securing itself in place. The moment it was done, Toshiro collapsed to his knees, taking in deep breaths. That was far harder than he had expected. Keeping the spell going wasn't too bad, but the amount of magic it took to make the spell in the first place was massive, and he never channeled so much at once before. He guessed the size of it had increased the magic required exponentially, as he didn't remember it being so hard when they had tested it before. Then again, their test had been a very small area with all of them working together. No wonder it was easy back then. He couldn't rest any longer. The moment the spell appeared, he would have painted a giant bullseye on his head. He had to get the rest of the barrier up and trap all the enemy forces inside it. His hands slowly started swiping to the sides, following the patterns he had learned for this moment. At least the hard part was done. This spell, occurring to Shinji at least, had been developed by a man called Haki. The man had been a genius, and he would have loved to have met the man. From the notes he had read on the spell, it had been developed and completed by Haki himself and had been the solution on how to generate large barriers without excessive consumption of magic. The first gate would consume the most, and then the next gates would borrow power from the first for rapid generation. Picturing the cube he wanted, a small circle of energy appeared far away in the distance on what would be the side at the right, quickly expanding outwards as it grew to the same size of the first gate. It reminded him a lot of the wheel of a watermill, except with the brown being exchanged for a black center with white surrounding it on the edges. Out of all the gates, this was the easier to allow others through. Koken Nojuman. Moving to the left side, small hexagons of green light appeared, multiplying and fusing together to form larger and larger hexagons in a honeycomb-like structure. When all the hexagons had combined to form a gate equivalent in size to the others, the green energy became solid, changing to brown color instead. Kigai Nojuman. He collapsed back to the ground once more, almost losing all his focus. This was too hard. He couldn't do it. He didn't have the energy, especially not when he had never done this alone before. What could he do? The gates were meaningless alone. They all needed to be there to complete the barrier. Damn it! If only he had a bit more magic. He could cast the last spell and... Flames shot across the sky, Toshiro's eyes going wide as he saw them form a ring in the area the last gate would go. From the flames descending many red planks of wood, not one of them being burned despite the intense flames they were being created from. In the middle of where the planks began descending, a white obelisk held the two sides. With the last plank created, the flames vanished and the two sides of wood slowly closed in towards each other till the ends of each side joined each other. Toshiro couldn't believe his eyes. How Iyaku Nojuman? That was the last gate needed. But who had cast it? Was it Ichigo? Or perhaps Shinji had seen the process and had decided to lend a hand. Both knew the spell after all. There was no time to waste. Forcing himself to stand, he brought one hand up to his chest, his index and middle fingers pointed upwards. He did the same with his other hand, but instead raised it to the sky before swiping down. Shijuyu no Samon. From all four gates shot dark green light, extending their sides before bending at right angles towards each other and any other sides. When the last piece connected, Toshiro dropped back to his feet before letting out a sigh of relief. I did it. A small smile slowly appeared on Toshiro's face before it grew as big as it could. I did it. He almost wanted to jump to joy if he had the energy to do so. So it looks like I made it out in time then. And then the joy vanished as he saw the form of Brain and a group of mages behind him, not one of them trapped with Nirvana inside the barrier. Well then, I think it will be in your best interests to take down that barrier, young boy. What did he do? This was the leader of Oration Cease, and he had at least 30 mages with him, maybe more. He was low on magic too, and any spare had to go towards the upkeep of the barrier so it would hold. So he did the only thing he could think of in that situation. He ran. Protector of the Fairies. Cobra smiled happily as he and Cubelios landed on Nirvana's peak, the bat-like wings on Cubelios' back vanishing as he stepped off his friend. In one hand he held Brain's staff, preparing to do his job as a delivery boy. It was demeaning, but he'd put up with it. They were so close now. He could always take control for himself. Brain wouldn't be able to stop him here, and then it would all be his. So much power. So much he could. He cut off his thoughts, shaking his head roughly. He was getting caught up here. The magic was almost intoxicating. It was something he had never felt before, and was stronger than anything up at the peak. He couldn't give in to temptation, especially since Brain was the only one who knew how to control Nirvana. He wouldn't even know where to start if he tried. Was this all there was to the peak though? This was where Nirvana was commanded from. There was very little there, an enclosed dome above his head with regal pillars holding it up. And they looked strong too. He wondered how much damage they could take before they would shatter. Runes covered the grounds, all dulled and faded. Perhaps they would start up once more when Brain reactivated Nirvana completely. Perhaps they shielded the peak. Or maybe they sent signals to the magic of Nirvana itself. What was strange to him though was the solitary throne, resting in the middle of the dome. He had to admit, it had a decent view from what he could see. And there would likely be some kind of command system that could be moved to the throne too for the old king. The throne was odd. It wasn't anything fancy. It was elegant, yet basic, looking to be more of wood and stone than anything else. Yet he felt something from that chair. He moved a bit closer before he found himself stopping. Why? Why did he stop? He was trying to reach the throne. He took another step only to get the same result. He wasn't moving towards it. What was that throne? He couldn't reach it properly. It was like there was something telling him to stop. An instinctual command that he couldn't comprehend saying to leave. It had to be his mind playing tricks on him. After all, why would he be afraid to sit on a chair? It was always a possibility that the last king had been imposing enough to have left some kind of residual image, and he was sensing the remains of that. Nirvana would have been in status for 400 years after all. It was still imposing being in this area. Brain had called it the King's Summit, and there had been a bit of awe in the man's voice. He had heard the rough thoughts Brain had about it. And Brain barely understood much about it too, to his surprise. Most of what they knew about this area came from their benefactor. Hurry up already. Cobra sighed before leaving the throne alone, walking over to where the front of the room was, if the throne's direction was to be assumed correct. Raising Brain's staff, strange screens burst into existence, surrounding the entirety of the summit. They looked a lot like archive screens for some reason, yet that couldn't be. Archive magic was new. So what was this magic? In front of the throne, a small pedestal rose, and even from a distance he could sense the energy inside the small little orb resting on the top. It looked a lot like a lacrima to him, but then it could be anything. In the center of the summit suddenly appeared a golden symbol, a circle inside another circle that then extended upwards and downwards with two pairs of wing-like protrusions. At the top of the outer circle was a harp-like design, with a smaller version of the harp below the outer circle. Inside the inner circle was a smaller filled circle, two arched stripes around it. Was this a symbol that represented Nirvana? It looked like the central controls of some sort. Taking the staff Brain had given him, he rested it in front of the symbol before leaving, jumping back onto Cubelios and taking to the skies. He was just in time, as no sooner had he left had Nirvana began to move. It was quite annoying being a dragon slayer at times. Even as a second-generation version, he was still not safe from that motion sickness weakness. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as some had it, but it could be distracting if he stayed there for too long. No matter. With Brain's staff now in place, Nirvana could act. That staff was strange, especially since it could speak and had a mind of its own. But it was loyal to Brain. It was too afraid to betray him since it was so easy to destroy if it did so. "Let's go, girl," Cobra muttered to Cubelios. "Time to dash." His eyes widened as he forced Cubelios to the side, a blade passing by his head. He felt the wind cut as it swung past, some of his hair falling away from being caught by the blade. He spun round, seeing the murderous look of his attacker. He recognized that man. He was the Shinigami that had turned up after they had defeated Ichigo. "So you are the one who's been tracking me. I wondered who it was, but I thought it might have been you. You were the one who looked the most murderous thinking back." "Stay still," Shinji muttered, his voice expressing nothing but pure rage and anger. "I'm going to tear you apart." Cobra couldn't help but shake slightly. Those eyes. They were dangerous. But one thing bothered them. Why was one of them yellow? And why was the sclera black? Cobra brought up his fists, his magic already shifting them as his Dragon Slayer magic activated. Fingers became scaled and nails became claws. He smirked, his mind already hearing all the moves Shinji would make. "Bring it on." Protector of the Fairies. Otai winced, slowly forcing himself to his feet. He had underestimated Urza when he fought her. She truly had been a worthy opponent. He couldn't understand it, but he felt different now. Was it because he lost? Or was it because of Nirvana? Why had he had these fears about when Nirvana would be released? Brain had told them all that if their minds wavered from their correct path, then misfortune would find them. They would lose the path they had been walking on in the darkness and would find themselves believing in the light. They had all scoffed at such an idea, yet he had doubts up to the moment when Nirvana had been released. And when he saw that light, they vanished. Oh, they came true, but they no longer worried him anymore. In so long, he felt free. Had he been walking the wrong path for so long? He'd been so desperate to find his brother that he had committed hundreds of crimes, all in the aim of money to continue his search. Why did he go down this path? Hadn't he once believed that he would keep searching no matter what, even if he had no money? Why had money become so important over the years? Maybe he had used it to cope and throw himself further into the darkness. Everyone needed something to keep hold onto when they dove into desperation. Perhaps it had been money that had acted as his lifeline, as it was the only link he could think of towards his brother. But now, he had been saved. He was pulled from that abyss, and could finally see what he should have done. What was the point of finding his brother after so long if he would become a man that his brother would be disgusted to look at? He could barely look at himself, so ashamed of his actions. How funny that his heaven's eye could see everything, even through solid objects and over vast distances, yet he missed the things right in front of him. He had once believed that the magic would allow him to find his brother more easily. It had been a tool of hope. How had he transformed it into a weapon? Urza Scarlet. The determination she had to sever her own arm to keep moving amazed him. Cobra said that he had heard stuff from her mind. And, thinking back, he remembered once seeing a red-haired girl back in his childhood at the Tower of Heaven. She had been so quiet back then, and he remembered a young version of Jelal being so protective of her. It was funny that only now did they realize that not all of the people from the Tower of Heaven had fallen into darkness. Urza, despite all she must have suffered, had risen above it, never letting herself submit to the darkness. She could have been so strong if she had done so. The power the darkness could give to people was immense when fueled correctly. All the pain and suffering she had endured would have made her go far in that world. Yet she had clung to the light, reaching towards faint bits of that light and bringing them towards her until she shone as bright as the sun. It was no surprise someone like that had won and had then left him alive. She shone so bright, too much to be able to kill him. And he was thankful of that. Because of that mercy, he could finally escape like she had done. But what would he do now? He could see Nirvana breaking free, and as much as he wished there was hope, he couldn't see any. His eyes picked up a small trace of energy in the distance and he stared at it, watching as it slowly formed a massive gate. Two more appeared not too long after as he gleefully observed their designs. They were incredible feats of magic. So this was a barrier Kadu. A final gate appeared far above him, the entire area enclosed by the gates becoming nothing more than a cube cage. Incredible. Truly incredible. It was something like this that would have given him hope. However, it still didn't. Because if the barrier was up, Brain would be outside it. Which meant Cobra would be heading to the King's Summit right now, ready with Brain's staff for a remote control of Nirvana. The crushing defeat of the light, the Shinigami's falling, the hunt happening, it was all as the plan said. Of course some things were wrong. They hadn't expected to be defeated, he would admit that. They hadn't crushed them as much as they were meant to at the start. They had gotten overconfident. But even when overconfident, Brain still had his mind. This still followed the plan. Everything that had happened this day was leading to one final moment. And now that he was on the side of the light, he could see what a terrifying moment it would be. Why had that man come to them with that plan all those weeks ago? What had been the man's objective? What had been the advantage to gain for him? The man had been vague for the short time they had all met, and he didn't like it. Everything was happening just as the man said. Which meant it was only a matter of time. His heaven's eye cast its glaze into the distance, rapidly searching the area for anyone he could find. He saw the odd dark guild roaming around, searching for easy prey. They were nothing to focus on. They had been part of the original plan after all. In the distance was that airship Blue Pegasus had. Christina Angel had said. A magnificent sight to behold, even as it rained death on the foolish dark guilds that chose to attack it. He could try and reach it, but he would likely be treated as an enemy the moment they saw him. He wouldn't get a chance to speak, not if they couldn't risk taking any chances. That left anyone on the ground. Far away, Midnight was fighting. He could see the two mages, but he couldn't go help them. The fight would sure to be over by the time he reached them, and he couldn't afford to waste the time trying to find them with what was at stake. Urza. She had to be the one to find. She would at least listen to him, and possibly take his words under consideration. She might be able to help stop what was going to happen if he made it in time. But where was she? His eye couldn't see her, at least not yet. It was taking too long. He needed to find her now. A flash of light caught his eye, even if it wasn't able to be seen normally at his distance. It was far away, but he could see the person in the light. Jalal. The flight pattern suggested he was rushing somewhere, but only had a vague idea of where to go. And considering Jalal's past, and his recent incident with the Tower of Heaven, there was likely a chance he was rushing to Urza. Would that be good or bad? Jalal didn't like people taking his things, and the man frightened him quite frankly. Even Brain was wary of the man somewhat. And if he was going to kill Urza instead, then she would be in trouble. He rushed off, following the man's direction as he jumped into the ground, allowing the liquid earth around him to speed him through and not get left behind too much by Jalal. He had to hurry. If he didn't get there soon, all hope would be lost. Nirvana could not be fired. Under any circumstances. Protector of the fairies. Keep standing, keep fighting. Gray spread his hands out, daggers of ice forming and firing towards Midnight. At the same time Leon acted himself, small birds forming and flying towards his enemy without the need for a command. Midnight watched as the ice flew towards him and blinked. The moment the ice was about to reach him, it shot to the side and around him, not a single bit of ice even scratching him. Was that all you've got? Not by a long shot. Leon raised his hands in a creation form above his head before swinging, tigers of ice appearing. Each of them ran towards Midnight as the birds that Leon had previously created changed direction, all attacking Midnight at once from all directions. Again, none of it seemed to faze Midnight as each attack missed him by a long shot, not anything able to get a grasp on him. Midnight sighed in annoyance. Was this all the two mages would do? He reached out with one of his hands and gripped a tiger by its neck. The tiger snapped at him, but the teeth simply missed, bending around him as they tried to reach him. With his other hand, he brought his fist down on the tiger, smashing it into pieces. He demolished the other tigers and birds with ease before some ice shot down by his side. He glanced at the ice sword that missed him, not worried in the slightest as he waved a fist straight at his attacker, a sharp blast of air cutting into Gray as he was flung backwards. Gray rolled as he flew backwards, landing as safely as he could as he brought a hand up to his chest where the air blade had cut into him. Ice rapidly spread over the wound, freezing it shut before much blood could spill. Gray. I'm okay, muttered Gray. Barely hurt. I won't let him get me next time. Fine then, came the response. Leon raised his hands once more as two small ice dragons began forming. Gray saw what Leon was planning and jumped onto one of them as Leon did the same, both dragons taking flight into the air. Midnight smiled as both dragons flew towards him, raising a hand. You're too close. And the both dragons exploded outwards, the ice flying to the sides in weird distorted shapes. Gray and Leon weren't one to take the surprise without reacting though, both jumping from the ice with one hand raised downwards, the other facing back behind them as they guided the remaining ice into a new slide form. The two slid down, jumping off at the last moment and creating weapons of ice. Leon formed a large long broadsword while Gray created an oversized hammer. Leon swung first, attempting to make Midnight jump. Instead, Midnight smirked, the blade bending as it went to hit him and returning to normal as it slid past him. Gray didn't stop his attack because of that however, instead raising the hammer up high and smashing it down against the mage. Dust kicked up from the ground and they could see the earth cracking from the force of the blow. Did we dash? The ice shattered outwards, Midnight still wearing that same smirk on his face. And there wasn't a single mark on him. What? Leon glanced from Midnight to the remains of Gray's ice hammer. There was no way that Midnight should have come out of that unharmed. He had watched the mage get hit, and Midnight had done nothing to defend himself. In fact, he was still in the same pose as when the hammer had hit him. Did he even move at all to free himself? That was worrying. If Midnight was using something without even moving, exactly how powerful was this man? To freely use magic like that suggested a large degree of intense experience. Most mages needed some form of movement half the time. Even Jura would make small moves when he acted, whether it was a shift in his stance to a step forward. Or maybe Midnight was moving. Perhaps it was simply subtle movements that made his magic work. They had already seen him raise his hand once to destroy their ice dragons, so he must have needed it then. Distance could be a crucial factor in the man's powers. If that was the case, then they couldn't fight him at a distance. Their attacks weren't fast enough to reach the man before whatever he did happened. While the man might be more effective at doing whatever he was doing at close range, they were more effective too. And Midnight hadn't responded to his attacks the same way when he had overwhelmed the man. Perhaps numbers were the key. Still, they had to hurry. They had seen when Nirvana had fully been released not that long ago and couldn't afford to hang around the area they were in for too long. Gray. How much time can you buy me? As much as you need, and then extra. Good. I'll hold you to that. As Leon raised his hands into a creation stance, Gray rushed towards their enemy. Ice spread along his limbs as he clapped his hands together, his ice make magic shaping the ice into sharp blades on the edge of his arms. Midnight actually raised an eyebrow as Gray nearer him, interested in what Gray was about to do. The first blade came round as Gray swung his arm, the blade missing Midnight as it bent around the mage without harming him. Gray spun on his heel, using the momentum to increase the speed. His second strike came round it. Again it missed Midnight, not harming the mage or even reaching him. Gray continued his assault till he reached the seventh strike before Midnight ducked under the swing, raising an arm under the blade with his palm outstretched. The blade exploded into pieces from inside, the ice scattered across the clearing and yet none hit Midnight still. Gray snarled, the other blade of ice shattering. There was no point of continuing to keep it in place if it wouldn't even help him. Midnight sudden raised a hand towards Gray, the black-haired mage reacting instantly. A hand shot up and a hastily constructed block of ice appeared between the two. Midnight smiled more sinisterly and Gray quickly learned why as he felt his clothes tightening around him, restraining his movements. His shirt reached up towards his neck, wrapping round it and making it hard to breathe. He couldn't even call for help. He didn't need to, however. Leon raised his hands finally, a large force of ice constructs forming. Tigers, bears, wolves, eagles, panthers, and many more different animals were appearing rapidly. Midnight actually looked both surprised and impressed, releasing his hold on Gray as he dropped his arm back to his side. Gray gasped for breath as his clothes released their hold on him, glancing at Leon in surprise at all the constructs he had created. Ice Make, Zoo Rampage. Leon took a deep breath, using the quick opportunity to shake off the exhaustion he was feeling from the large amount of magic he had been forced to quickly channel. Midnight didn't even try and use the opportunity, instead waiting patiently with interest. It looked like the Dark Mage wanted to see what his attack would do, and that arrogance was going to play against him right now. Get him! The constructs roared, all charging in at once at Midnight. They leaped and flew at the mage from all sides, providing no opportunity for Midnight to escape from. As the first animal came, Midnight grabbed it, spinning and throwing the animal towards one of the eagles attempting to attack him from a blind spot. At the same time a bear brought its claws down at Midnight only to bend around the mage, Midnight not even registering the attack. Instead he attacked one of the lions that had snuck at him from one side, pinning it against the ground. He jumped onto the animal and used it as a springboard, leaping onto one of the eagles as he aimed a hand back at the lion below to cause it to shatter into pieces. A swarm of birds joined him in pursuit, even as the eagle Midnight was riding on tried to throw him off. Midnight brought a sharp kick down on the eagle's neck, breaking off its head and causing it to begin falling out of the sky. The birds nearby tried to pull away but Midnight was already jumping towards them, grabbing them as he fell and either smashing them together if they were small enough or grabbing onto one of the bigger ones and repeating what he did with the eagle. As the last bird fell, he landed softly on the ground, the earth bending inwards as he hit it before restoring back to its original position. A group of tigers took that opportunity to pounce at him but Midnight swung his arm towards them, a vortex of air grabbing the group and ripping them to pieces from the furious force the attack contained. Midnight glanced back behind him as the remains of Lion's creations slowly approached him. And then they settled for all attacking at once, leaving absolutely no room to escape or dodge from, even if one was destroyed in the process. Not one of them hit Midnight. Midnight simply stood there as all the animals flew past him, some being destroyed from simply crashing into one another. A flew flicks with his hand and the last few shattered into pieces of ice, none left to challenge him. Lion's eyes widened as he took in everything he was seeing. All that magic he used, the entire army he formed, it had all been useless. He could sense Midnight mocking him as he turned to smile at them, his eyes gloating of his invincibility. That was madness. How could not one of his attacks hit? Why did they all miss in that last attack? Why were their attacks bending around the man? Unless... was that the man's magic? To bend things? But then what did he do to Gray? You're distorting things. Gray was the one who actually spoke up in the end, glaring at Midnight whose smile had only gotten bigger at being found out. I knew it. The dots quickly clicked in Lion's mind. Distorting the air could cause those sharp blades to appear, distorting the ice as it came to hit him would allow it to miss, distorting the air would grant a soft landing, and distorting someone's clothes would cause them to attack their wearer. But why did he use his hands for some things and not for others? Was it simplicity? No, it had to be another reason. That was it. He had worked it out. He glanced at Gray and saw the mage give him a nod. Good. They were on the same page with what the man's magic was capable of. Now all they had to do was use it against the man, and then find a way past his defenses. Before anyone else could move, light lit up the area from above. They all abandoned fighting for a moment as they stared up at the bright flames in the sky before they formed a gate of some kind. It was a few moments later when transparent dark green light shot across the sky, enclosing them all within a cube of it. What? What is this? Muttered Gray, staring into the sky. Leon? Do you know what this is? Not a clue, came the reply. Leon glanced at the barrier they were trapped within, his eyes scanning the edges of it and seeing how far it enclosed. Ah! It must be the last of the Shinigami. Now that Nirvana has been released, I guess it counts as an emergency and that it needs to be contained. Someone dares to defy Father. Midnight's smile disappeared, changing to an ugly snarl. How dare they? I'll rip them apart and force this pathetic barrier to fall. Not while we're here, you won't, said Gray. You aren't going anywhere. You think you will stop me? No matter, it doesn't affect anything either way. I'm sure Father is already there dealing with the trash. Lion's eyes widened, glancing back at the barrier. Looking closely he could see small fluctuations in the walls of energy, almost unstable in appearance. That meant trouble. If the Shinigami was holding the barrier in place, could they even fight if someone came close enough to them? He looked towards Gray, but Gray had already beaten him to it. Go. Leon glanced at Midnight and then back to Gray. Are you sure? I'll be fine. Just get out of here. Warn the others. Leon took one more look at the two before turning and running off. He paused for one moment to shout back at his friend. Don't die. You hear me? Will never forgive you if you end up dying to someone like this. I don't plan to. Now get out of here. Midnight watched as Leon left, turning the rest of his sole attention towards Gray. Was that wise for you? You haven't even scratched me, and yet you believe you can beat me alone? Your friend would have stood a greater chance that you would. He'll be fine. He's faster than I am, especially as he can create an eagle or something to move about on if he wants to. We need speed now to stop Brain. Midnight laughed. It started more of a chuckle before breaking down into something more hysterical. That's a good one. You won't beat Father. None of you can. He's planned for this for a long time. It's far too late to stop any of us now. Glancing behind him, Midnight smiled at the giant form of Nirvana. Look at it. That is our prize. No one can take it away from Father. What? You don't think it is yours too? Not at all. I don't care about Nirvana personally. But Father wants it, and I live to serve Father. You're messed up there, you know that. You would never understand. Midnight turned back to face Gray, a sinister smile back on his face. So what will you do now? Can you at least give me something funny to watch? I'll do more than that. I've worked it all out. Ah. My reflector magic. Yes, you said you'd worked out about its distorting abilities. I've done more than that. The smirk vanished from Midnight's face. The dark mage watched Gray carefully. I've worked out the little limitations it has. And you're completely out of luck now. Gray reached towards his shirt before he pulled it off in one swift move. He did the same with his trousers, leaving him in just his underwear. Midnight frowned at the actions, especially when Gray raised one finger. So what? You stripped? Nice try. Midnight scowled, even as Gray continued talking. When you strangled me with my clothes, I noticed how it was the fabric that was moving, but it never got any longer. And after working out you could distort things, it only made sense that you distorted my clothes to attack me. So all I had to do was to get rid of the excess before fighting you. You could always use it on me still, but how much can you do with just my underwear? Gray held up a second finger before continuing. Furthermore, why did you stop when Leon prepared his attack? If you could distort things, couldn't you have continued with my as he attacked you? That solved another mystery about your magic. You can use your magic in two places. Around you, or away from you. But you can only use your ability in one of them. That's why you said that Leon and I were too close. Because we were both close enough to the radius of the distorted area that you moved toward us. Midnight stared at Gray before he laughed once more. That's it? You know how it works. Don't be ridiculous. You couldn't touch me before, and this won't let you touch me now. I know, said Gray. I already knew that. But I have two things here. The first is that your magic won't affect me. If it did, we could have been killed from the start with ease. The human body is something your magic won't distort. Gray turned his head to the side, glancing at the direction where Leon had gone. And the second thing I have is that Lion's gone. Your friend was the only one of you that might have stood a chance when I was weaker. How exactly can you do better? Out of both of the disciples of I can see who the better ice make magic was. Instead of taking offense to it, Gray just gave Midnight a sad smile. I already know that. I can only use static ice make magic, but Leon got so good that he could make dynamic ice make magic. He breathes life into what he makes, something I can't even comprehend how to accomplish. Then how can you win? Because I've got my own talent. Gray smirked, clenching a fist and bringing it in front of his face. I've met many different ice magic users in the world, and everyone chooses something to focus on in the end. Like how you can't master every magic, you can't always master every aspect of a branch too. You choose what works best, what you have the most talent for. I'm no exception. It just took me a long time to work out what my true strength was. Gray brought his fist back down, keeping an eye on Midnight as the mage listened. That arrogance was going to be the man's downfall, especially as he doubted the man had noticed he was gathering magic as he spoke. Or maybe he did and just didn't care to stop him. Still, he needed some more time. So he kept talking. Take Ichigo's friend for starters. I didn't see it for myself, but I heard of what he could do. He could create large amounts of ice with a mere swing of his blade, and that is something rare, I'll tell you that. I can generate a fair amount myself, but he must have at least tripled that amount, and he's about 12 or something. That's impressive. Gray gestured at where Leon had gone. I've told you about Leon. His speciality was breathing life into his magic. There was a bit between me and Leon, but with her own twist. A lot of the people who saw her fight would have seen roses and flowers of ice in her attacks. The truth is that it's because her speciality was in what could only be described as organic ice make magic. Midnight raised an eyebrow. Organic ice make magic? Yep. Half her attacks were like plants in a way, but it didn't have to be plants. When I made a foolish mistake, she came to save me. When I woke up, she was still fighting, one of her legs missing. So she had created one out of ice. And I'm sure you know that just a normal construct of ice would be nothing more than a crutch. She was moving freely with this, as if it was connected to all her nerves as a real leg. Gray smirked as he saw the interest in Midnight's eyes. Feed them some information like that and everyone would fall for it with ease. It helps that it was all true, but it wasn't like it was a secret or anything. There wouldn't be the first to have used ice magic as she did. But what was my strength? I only found out a few years ago when I was helping Natsu. My power was never in the quantity of ice I could produce, or in the power or uniqueness the constructs had. And it wasn't about it being special too. It was something so simple, and yet so complex. Then show me, said Midnight, an almost urgent tone in his voice with his eyes widen in excitement. You've been building up magic for a while now. Show me. I was already going to do that. Gray reached down to the ground and placed both palms against the ground. Ice make, Ice Age. And then everything froze, Midnight only surviving due to his magic reflecting the frozen ground away from him on instinct. His eyes widened as he spun round, taking in everything that had happened. The trees, the ground, it was all frozen solid, a small layer of ice covering them all. And he could swear it hadn't stopped in just their area too. This is my speciality. I was always good at freezing stuff with my magic, but I never went into it at all. I focused on my imagination with Ice Make, and now the two of them can work in perfect unison. Freezing, muttered Midnight. Rate of freezing, speed of freezing, amount that can be frozen. You can't create massive amounts of ice, so you freeze the ground to get the extra you may want. But why not reveal this earlier? It's not perfect yet. Or at least not in the way I want it. It's deadly to everyone. I can't stop that yet. I'd likely end up killing him by accident if he stayed here. Midnight smirked, slashing a hand at Gray as distorted air flew through the air. Gray swung a hand as a large wall of ice shot up from the ground, using the ice already available to both increase its speed of creation and to decrease the energy needed. The air hit the wall and managed to break halfway through it before it stopped, Midnight smiling wilder than before. Excellent. I take back what I said before. You are more than certainly the greater of Ur's disciples. Enough talk, said Gray, his eyes cold as he stared at Midnight. Besides, I'm glad Leon isn't here anymore. I'm a fairy tale mage, someone who should be very pure in terms of light and dark. I don't want him to see what I'm going to do to you. Oh really? Midnight couldn't help but feel excited at the prospect. And what are you going to do to me? I'm going to kill you. Bringing his hands together, ice gathered between the two palms, molding into a giant spinning disc. Gray took a step forward before throwing the disc at Midnight, twisting his body as he threw. Ice make, saucer. Midnight glanced at the attack and smirked, allowing it to reach him and slide right past. In that moment Gray had used the opportunity to get closer, determined to not allow Midnight to use any long-range attacks by forcing him to block the ones close to him. Ice make, lance. Gray slammed his hands against the ground and spears of ice shot out below Midnight's feet, intending to impale him. The spears just bent around the man's body once more and Midnight raised an arm once the spears had passed him. Gray jumped backwards as the attack happened, spreading his arms out to the sides as a large shield came forth from the ground. Midnight's attack didn't break through completely but it did shatter the shield. As the pieces of ice fell, Gray's hands shot out and grabbed two of the largest pieces, swinging them around towards other falling pieces and letting his magic manipulate the ice and fuse them all together. The end result was a large bow of ice, Gray already bringing it to bear against Midnight. Ice make, arrows. Hundreds of small tiny arrows flew from the bow, Midnight's eyes actually widening as they all flew at him. For once he actually moved his hands for controlling the distorted area around him, even going so far as to dodge some of the arrows instead of standing still. He could distort a large number of objects easily, but this amount was far too great for him to control subconsciously. The barrage finally let up as the last pieces of the bow Gray was holding disappeared, most of the ice having come from the bow itself. Gray smirked as he watched Midnight try to regain his composure. So there is a limit of how much you can control, or at least without doing anything. I wonder how far it is till the next limit you have. His composure regained, Midnight glanced along the ground between the two, noticing some areas of the ice looked thinner than before. How interesting. You spread your magic through the ice when it was formed. That's how you can still manipulate it so quickly right now. But there is only so much. Midnight gestured at the area around Gray, noticing the small circle around him that wasn't covered in ice. That attack just used up all the ice in that area. Are you sure you can keep up something like that? It served its purpose. Midnight's eyes widened as 20 spears of ice stabbed past him, only his magic saving him. He swung his head round, seeing how the remains of the arrows had joined with the ice on the ground and formed spears at that moment. But that wouldn't have worked. The ice mage must have known that. Unless. Midnight's head shot back round, desperately trying to spot Gray before it was too late. He had been tricked, and he could already see Gray closing the distance. He swung his hand at the mage, large distorted amounts of air flying at Gray. At the last second, a wall of ice jumped forth from the ground, Gray's feet colliding against it as he jumped and used it to push himself away from the attack. As his feet hit the icy ground, ice spread along his feet, raising him slightly as small skates formed below on the soles of his feet. Another attack from Midnight came but he was ready this time, using the skates to help dodge the attacks in combination with the frozen ground he was using to travel along. Midnight had enough time to swing his hand one more time before Gray finished closing the distance between them, a nice sword jumping forth from the ground for him to grab. He swung the sword but Midnight's magic reacted on instinct, the sword bending around the mage instead of slashing against him. It didn't stop there however. Midnight took control, forcing the ice to bend back round and slash at its wielder. Gray tried to dodge but the ice blade still managed to cut into his side as it flew past. He grabbed onto the ice before it could attack him anymore, stealing some of it back to freeze his wound shut before breaking the rest off from the sword and reshaping it into a large axe. He swung it round but it missed Midnight still, Midnight actually sighing at the attempt, and for that moment he dropped his guard. And Gray smirked at it. The axe fell apart, its purpose used up as a new blade sprung forth from the ground for Gray to grab. Then, with his free hand, he grabbed Midnight's arm. Midnight's eyes shot open at the sudden contact, looking between Gray's grip and the sword held in the mage's other hand. Ice rapidly spread from Gray's grip, and he could feel his arm freezing solid and time passed. At the same moment, Gray swung his sword down at his arm. He could easily dodge the blade, he knew that. But he could feel his arm freezing, and how long would it be before it spread to the rest of his body if he was already freezing this quickly? It had almost reached his shoulder in a few seconds. So he pushed himself as far away from Gray as he could, letting the sword slice through some of the ice of his arm and separating him from the ice mage. He used the chance to put as much distance as he could between the two, glancing at his lost arm still held in Gray's hand. He glanced towards where he had lost it from. He still had half the area between his shoulder and his elbow, but the lower half of it was frozen still from the ice. And it was good too. He had ensured Gray would have only chopped off a frozen area. Otherwise he could have bled to death without some way to stop the bleeding. His magic wouldn't help him there. One thing bothered him as he turned back towards Gray, the mage looking happy as he held the arm in his hands. Why? Gray looked at Midnight in amusement. Why what? Why didn't you just freeze me solid? Why did you give me a chance to escape? Gray shrugged. I wanted to see if you would actually do it. Besides, I wanted to cut your arm off too. Gray's grip on the arm tightened as he glanced at it before chucking it away. It's because of you lot that Urza lost her arm today. So I'm going to make you experience the same pain she had to have felt. I'm going to pay you back 100-fold. Big words. You had your chance to kill me. I won't make the same mistake again. Midnight glanced upwards at the sky, noticing the position of the rising moon. Such a shame. I won't be at full power, you see, but it's close enough to midnight now. I think I might be able to get away with it just this once. Before Gray's eyes, Midnight changed, his body bulging in multiple areas as his body begun to distort itself. Midnight grew taller and taller till he towered above Gray, his form becoming more muscular and claws appearing on the ends of his hands as his body form changed. His hair became longer and shaggier while his eyes began to glow a bright sinister red. Even the environment around them seemed to change, the ice melting rapidly with steam being formed from the intense heat. The light got darker, hints of red in the sky. Midnight opened his mouth and laughed at Gray below, revealing a long line of sharp teeth. Gray wiped some sweat from his forehead, trying to ignore the feeling of his body shaking. It was almost overwhelming. The fear he was feeling was too much. The creation Midnight had transformed into. It was a demon. Midnight raised his clawed hands above his head, a dark orb of energy forming between the two. Gray rushed backwards, realizing what the demon was about to do. He threw his hands in front of him, mustering as much ice and magic as he could, and created a large group of shields between him and Midnight. It didn't stop the orb when Midnight threw it. It shattered all the shields with unnatural ease, throwing him away as the blast detonated right in front of him. He flew backwards through the air, burns covering his whole body as he forced himself to land somewhat safely. He barely had time to rest as Midnight had already rushed at him, bringing one massive clawed hand down on him. He rolled to the side, using some quick ice make magic to slow the arm down as it crashed at where he had been. As quickly as he could, a large axe of ice formed and he swung it down at the arm, the ice harmlessly breaking against the skin. Gray's eyes widened and Midnight smirked, swatting Gray away with a glancing blow. Gray crashed against the trees, coughing up blood as he felt the impact. Something must have broken, and he could feel himself getting weaker. Damn it! Was this it? He couldn't win. Not against a demon. I won't let you get closer to my pupils. This is it, monster. That voice. He remembered it. Why was he remembering her now? Was dead. To defeat a demon, she had frozen it solid alongside herself. And there was no way he could use iced shell in his condition. Step into the future. I'll seal your darkness. Was he really going to just lie there and die? After everything did for him? He refused to. He wanted to make Midnight pay. He wanted to protect his friends. He had to win, even if he would lose his life in the process. He could feel his blood boiling in anticipation. He struggled to his feet, seeing Midnight smirking somehow in amusement. He glared at the demon, a strange sensation in his chest. The fear he had felt was vanishing. Something was feeling off. Why had he been so scared? Deliara had been so much more frightening from the moment he had laid eyes on it, and he had felt something else too. Neither of those emotions was present right now. Why weren't they? Hey, Gray called. Are you really a demon? Midnight laughed. You already know the answer to that. Now say goodbye. Midnight raised a fist and flung it down at Gray, the ice mage standing his ground as the attack came. He closed his eyes instead, ice gathering around his hands, and stopped trying to dodge. He felt the pain when the fist hit him, but he ignored it as best as he could, still waiting. And then he felt it. He spun round, his hands grasping the air. There was nothing there, but Gray didn't trust that feeling anymore. Ice spread along from where his hands were, freezing nothing. And then it all vanished. The world returned to normal, the ice floors back in place and the sky returned to its normal color. And in his hands was Midnight, half his body already frozen and the ice spreading even further. He could see the blade of ice he had held before no longer in his grip, instead plunged partway into his chest. He didn't bother trying to remove it, just let it could do more harm than good right now. Midnight slowly stopped struggling, his body growing weaker as the cold seeped further and further into his bones. Only his head wasn't frozen yet, and the ice extending towards it would soon fix that. My prayer. Midnight muttered, his eyes growing heavy. I just wanted to be able to sleep in a quiet place. Gray released his grip on Midnight as the ice finally encased the dark mage completely. Go to sleep then. For eternity. He left Midnight like that, shattering the parts of the ice blade that weren't inside him and froze the remaining parts of the wound shut for the time being. He had gotten his revenge for Urza, so why did he not feel any better? Protector of the Fairies. Message received. Hibiki turned his head round towards Jura and Ichia, still as expressionless as before. Lamia Scales Leon Vastia has returned to receiving range. Message is as follows: the barrier will fall. Brain knows about it and has already prepared for it. Send assistance. Message end. Men. Ichia glanced at the barrier they had all been trapped in with a frown. Nirvana is trapped with us, but we can't get out. This is a problem, men. Jura nodded. The barrier cannot fall, under any circumstances. It worries me though on how Brain already knew about the barrier. Did anyone else know of our plans? The masters? Not many others outside of them. This was all planned out at the meeting, and then the guilds learned too. I remember my guild's reaction, men. Our guild was told too. Nothing specific, however. I doubt Master Bob said any more than that with your guild too. He didn't. I do not believe Makarov would have told anyone either. And the master of Kate Shelter has more than enough reason to keep things secret. Jura scratched his chin in thought. Then who was it? Unless there's a chance. What is it? Jura glanced out the window towards the forest below. There was someone close to us before. I didn't see him, but Wendy knew he was there. If he was with Oration Cease, then we would have known it. He would have attacked. Are you sure? Jura nodded. I'm positive. It can't be any of the defeated members of Oration Cease, and it won't be an underlying. They were able to hide so easily, to the point where Wendy was the only who could detect them. And that's only because of her magic. The skill to hide that easily, and not even appear on Hibiki's scans, means they aren't a normal opponent. They didn't attack you, argued Ichia. They could always be an ally. Or they could be an enemy. The point is that they are an unknown. And it strikes me as odd that there is someone like that here right now when all this stuff is happening, especially when Oration Cease seems to be prepared for quite a few of our strategies. They could have always predicted there being a barrier. Not one of this size. I didn't even know that they were planning to create one this big, or even this elaborate. A sound caught their attention as all the archive screens vanished. Hibiki collapsed to his knees and breathing heavily. Ichia rushed over to his student, holding the mage carefully. Take it easy, men. I'm all right, Hibiki slowly managed to say. Just tired. So very tired. It's okay, said Ichia, placing a reassuring hand around his student. You've done well today. Go ahead and rest. We'll take it from here. Gate. Top. Opening. Hibiki's eyes closed and his body went limp in Ichia's arms, the man picking the boy up and placing him against a wall as comfortably as he could. He looked back up at Jura to see the man looked at him questioningly. Hibiki is very talented, and Archive isn't the most draining of magic out there, but it still takes his toll. And he's been at it almost constantly for a few hours now, checking threats, scanning patients, managing the camp and organizing assaults. It's tough on him. And connecting to Christina isn't exactly an easy thing to do. It's extremely taxing on his mental energies. I should have stopped him earlier. He would have likely argued against it and continued no matter what you said. Jura took another look at Hibiki before heading for the door. But he gave us a message at the end. Yes. Ichiya glanced at Hibiki in confusion before rushing after Jura. That's not normal. He must have found the details in the data he was receiving and had abandoned everything else to get it to us. Of course he wouldn't have processed it correctly if he hadn't left that mode he was in. Which can only mean dash. Someone is opening the barrier, finished Jura, glancing up at the sky as he went onto the ship's main deck. Above them was the large red gate, and he could see the center of the gate slowly opening, provided a small exit point in the barrier. Christina won't fit through there, muttered Ichiya. And I don't know if we can get there in time. And without Hibiki's magic, we've lost any form of contact with everyone else. I might be able to make it to the top, stated Jura, observing the distance. But I can't guarantee I can find Brain before it is too late. There isn't any earth on the top of the barrier that I can use, and I'll be pressed thin just getting up there anyway. I'll do it. Ichiya and Jura glanced at one another, realizing that it wasn't one of them who had spoken just then. They turned to the source of the voice to see Natsu climbing the stairs, Happy, and Carla following after him. I'll take down Brain. Protector of the Fairies. Stand against the incoming darkness. Hurry up, Happy. Aye, sir. Natsu and Happy flew upwards, followed closely behind by Ichiya and Carla. It had been hard to make the cat agree to part from Wendy, but they had done it. And as much as they trusted Natsu to fight, Brain was simply too strong. They couldn't send Natsu alone to fight someone of Brain's level. Jura had wanted to go with him originally, but Ichiya had managed to persuade him in the end. He claimed that he would be a greater help as his magic had some excellent support capabilities, abilities that would be sure to help tip the scales in their favor. Carla flapped her wings faster, forcing her and Ichiya to rapidly try and close the distance between them and Natsu. Unfortunately, Natsu was leaving them behind, Happy using a lot more of its magic than Carla was willing to expend. They could catch up certainly, but the problem came for getting them out of there if necessary. Natsu. Natsu didn't hear him, the two fairy tale members shooting off towards one of the other gates the moment they left the top gate. Carla sighed as she watched them fly off. Idiots. Men. He's doing the same as before. Honestly, can't he wait? He's going to get himself killed at this rate. Ichiya shook his head. I can't blame him. Natsu is far more impulsive than most of us. I guess he gave in to those urges. And if that young Shinigami is in trouble, then we have to help him. To Natsu, getting there sooner means saving the boy earlier. If you said so. I do, men. Now, if you wouldn't mind, fair cat, please speed up. Carla grumbled under her breath. I won't be outdone by that he-cat. A sudden flap of her wings sent them rushing forward, speeding through the air. Ichiya could see the strain Carla was showing from the corner of his eye, but he didn't say anything. She was a proud cat. Asking if she was alright right now would simply be insulting. They slowly closed the gap, Happy glancing at them in confusion that they had managed to keep up, or that they had even tried. Most people never cared too much when Natsu ran ahead because he normally could handle anything he went after. Natsu though just nodded at them. Come on, we need to go faster. Do you even know where you are going? Of course I do, snarled Natsu. I wouldn't get Happy to go so fast if I didn't. Calm down, muttered Ichiya in annoyance. Save your anger for the enemy. For a few moments, Ichiya believed Natsu wasn't listening. Or maybe he was and was just ignoring him. Those doubts were laid to rest as Natsu finally opened his mouth to reply. Sorry. Natsu actually looked regretful at his attitude. I can't help it. Fire's a very emotional magic sometimes, and when your dad's a dragon. I got a lot of his instincts when he trained me, and I guess I got his impatience too. Dragons don't exactly hang back and take things slowly when they could crush everything they came across. You're not a dragon. You should remember that. I know. But I was still raised by one. Natsu sniffed the air quickly, turning his head to look at Happy. Alter our path, buddy. A bit to the left. So that's how you're tracking them. Never doubt a dragon's noise. But dash. It's part of the magic all right. Ichiya shrugged, or at least what was the best he could do as a shrug while Carla held him. Sounds terrible when faced with something horrid. Natsu shivered. You have no idea. The four crossed the last part of the barrier and found themselves over the forests that weren't captured in it. Even from this height, they could see something had happened. The ground was uneven in areas, and some trees had been ripped from the ground. Are we close? Natsu nodded. Yeah. Happy, straight onwards. They followed the path from above, soaring above the trees while they searched for their targets. A blast of energy shot upwards and the cats rolled to the side, pulling their passengers out of the way. Before Natsu could do anything, Carla released Ichiya, the man landing on one of the tree's branches and heading to the ground. Ichiya. Leave him, said Carla. I'll make sure to bring him forward once he's done here. Let him handle the other mages out here. He's not an S-class mage for nothing. Natsu glanced at the direction where Ichiya had gone, wanting to protest before ultimately giving up. Let's go, Happy. Aye. The two flew off, leaving Ichiya to deal with the mages below. Ichiya frowned as he spotted the numbers there. That was a lot of mages. That solved the mystery of where the missing guilds were. Now he had to deal with them all himself. There were far too many. He wasn't the best combat mage out there normally. His greatest strength had always been in support. He talked big sometimes, but Natsu was physically stronger than he was. And that was why Natsu had to go ahead. If either had a chance to win alone, Natsu had the greater chance. So he would have to trust Natsu could survive alone for now. He would focus on making sure none of the other mages could interfere. He reached for a test tube at his belt, bringing it to his nose and uncorking it. A faint aroma drifted from it and he slowly let it drift out around the area. If he was to win this, he would have to take it slowly. No one said he had to fight fair after all. Protector of the Fairies. Jalal flew through the air, unaware of his tracker. He could practically sense her. This Urza person. The name sounded in his head so much. Who was Urza? Why was she so important? Why was her name all that he remembered? He had forgotten even himself, and yet he knew her name still. He had to find her. She was the key to his past, he was sure of it. Jura made it sound like he did some bad things, but he still had to know more about who he was. Without knowing who he was no one. Even if he had done bad stuff, he still wanted to know what he had done. Was destroying the Magic Council his only sin? Or were there more? There wasn't far to go. He could feel her magic. It was so close now. He put on a final burst of speed and landed close to her, the woman he could see turning abruptly to face him. She was missing an arm, something that seemed wrong to him, and there were piles of bodies lying at her feet. She must have been in a big fight, but she looked no worse for wear. His eyes observed every detail. How she spotted him, how she shrugged off her fatigue with such simple movements at his appearance, even how she raised her sword at him, even though he was certain she couldn't make him out in the darkness. And it all seemed beautiful to him. But nothing stuck out more to him than her hair. It was lovely. A wonderful shade of red? Crimson? No, it was more of a scarlet color. Scarlet. That word stuck in his mind, resonating with some memory he couldn't completely remember. No, wait. He could remember it. A few words. A time when he was young. A dark cell with him and some others, with a small red-haired girl. Who's there? Called Urza. Show yourself. Scarlet. Jalal looked at her, not noticing the shock crossing her face as he slowly stepped into the light. Urza Scarlet. It's the color of your hair. No wonder I didn't forget it. Just like I promised. He didn't know what he had expected to happen. One moment he had been standing there, and the next he had been pinned to the ground, a blade over his heart. Urza. Shut up, she shouted. Was that a tear in her eye? A second later it was gone, as quickly as it had appeared. She pressed the blade further against him, drawing blood. How can you be here? How can you be alive? I don't know. There was nothing he could truly say to answer her. He must have wronged her in some terrible way to make her act like this towards him. And here he had felt such warmth from her name. Why was it all so confusing? The sword vanished before she threw a fist at him, punching him in the face. She did it again and again, her anger not diminishing. After everything you've done, why do you dare show your face to me again? Why? 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 I'm sorry, Jalal whispered. I don't know what I did to you, but I am truly sorry. You dare. Urza grabbed him by his clothes, pulling him back up and slamming him against a tree. Even with one arm, she was still extremely strong. How dare you? To say that you don't remember what you did. Do you have no shame? Urza couldn't believe the man she was holding. She wanted to pass this off as Jalal trying to fool her. But something was off. Even back then, she had felt a sense of unease. But it wasn't there this time. She could feel he was genuinely confused, and that made her angry more than anything. I'm sorry. They didn't tell me who I was, only that I did some bad things to people. Will you tell me? I want to know who I am. Please. I'm begging you. Who am I? They? Who else knows of you? Jalal tilted his head slightly. Jura. There was that Ichiya person too, and someone called Hibiki. I also met and helped transport this mage called Ichigo after rescuing Wendy. Rescue? Jalal nodded, taking her questioning gaze as a good sign. She revived me. I couldn't leave her there when I saw she was in danger from them. I see. Urza's grip tightened. So they knew, did they? They lied. They told me it was Taushiro. Could you let me go now, please? Urza's took her full attention back to him, a furious glare on her face. You want to know who you are? I once called you a friend. Jalal smiled at that. I see. So I was your friend. His smile dropped as he realized exactly what she had said. Wait. Once. You went mad, Urza snarled, her voice increasing with each word. You desecrated the dead. You hurt those you called friends, manipulating them as nothing more than tools which you later discarded. You destroyed the Magic Council. You condemned hundreds of innocent lives to death, all in the name of resurrecting a dead god. You killed Simon. Jalal could feel a prickling sensation in his eyes, even as Urza's tone became deafening. He had understood he had done some bad things, but hearing how terrible it had truly been from the only person his mind had managed to remember hurt more than he could express, especially with the death of this Simon person. And Urza wasn't done yet. If you are saying you've forgotten everything you did, she snarled, her grip releasing only to requip a sword and aim it at him, then I'll stab a blade straight through your heart and force you to remember. I. Urza lowered her sword, walking away in disgust. I can't stand to look at you. Get out of my sight. Jalal collapsed to his knees, the tears falling freely from his eyes now. What have I done? What kind of person was I, to do such things to people? Did you not hear me? I told you to leave. Please. Tell me I can't be such a person. Urza spun round, fury on her face. That would be a lie. You were once good, but you became so twisted and rotten and should have remained dead. The world would have been a better place without Jalal in it. Jalal. Jalal almost spat the name out as he said it. Yes. Your name. It seems the others told you at least that. Now get out of my sight, Jalal. No. Urza glared at him, her sword raised. What was that? I said no. Jalal? No. No, no, no. I refuse. I'm sorry. What exactly are you refusing? Jalal. Jalal forced himself to his feet, pushing himself slightly away from Urza. If Jalal had been such a person, then I refuse to be him. Do you hear me? I refuse to be Jalal. Urza cut herself off, lowering her sword in disgust. You would run away from the truth, Jalal? You would pretend your sins are worthless. Jalal's eyes locked were her own. If it means denying this world a Jalal and to make it a safer place, then I'll abandon everything that makes me who I was. Don't call me Jalal, because I refuse to be him. I don't remember those sins. I don't remember anyone and only barely remembered your name. A small smile started forming on Jalal's face as he spoke. I can be someone else. I can be whoever I want. My memories don't ever need to return. I'll seal them all away. I'll start from here. Jalal can stay dead, and I'll live on. I can do whatever he couldn't. I can treasure my friends. I can protect those precious to me. I can do anything, be anyone. Just not him. Never him. Urza turned away from him, walking away. Then get out of my sight. I refuse to talk to such a coward like you. Protector of the fairies. Are we almost there, Natsu? Not long now, Happy. Natsu sniffed the air, looking towards the distance and nodded. We're very close now. Just a bit further. Happy paused, his voice not being able to hide some of the fear in his voice. Will Ichia? Will that old guy be alright? Natsu turned his head, giving Happy a beaming smile. Of course he'll be fine, Happy. He may not look it, but remember that Urza was scared of him. He's super strong. The smile disappeared from Natsu's face as he turned away from his friend. There was no point in trying to make Happy worried. He was already worried himself, but he couldn't afford to show it. Ichia had shown his faith in him when the man had left to fight the other mages, and so he had to have faith in him too. He had to believe that the man would come back alive from it all, and that he would have won too. A blast of green energy suddenly shot forward, Happy rolling to the side. There. He could see Brain, and for an instant he could see Toshiro before the boy vanished. At the very least he had to allow the boy to get away. This barrier was meant to be important after all. So he would do what he did best. He would fight. Drop me. Happy released Natsu, letting the Dragon Slayer fall down to the ground from their height above the trees. Flames exploded around Natsu, his entire body setting alight as the flames rapidly circled him and created a cloak of flames to protect him. Slowly the cloak of flames became more distinct. Around his feet and hands were claws of flames, just like the ones he could normally produce. However, a trail of flames went out behind him, forming a tail of fire. He knew the rough basics of using a tail. He had seen Igneel use his own plenty of times, and the dragon had explained that it acted as easily as a limb did for a human. It was an extension of their bodies. It had taken a lot of practice, but he had found that same instinct for it. He wasn't done yet as two sets of flames shot out from his back. The flames twisted and spread out till they produced a single wing on each side of his back. They would follow the same instinctual use as a tail would, and this was his proudest achievement. Fire drive. Oh, said Brain with interest, eyeing the cloak for any particular weaknesses. That is impressive. You're almost like a real dragon, or at least as close as you can become right now. Do you have anything left though? You shouldn't reveal your hand right from the start. Natsu ignored the taunts. It was fine and all for the man to say that, but he had no choice. He wasn't an idiot. Brain had beaten Urza before. He had to fight seriously from the very start to even have a chance. He observed Brain, gaining a confused look that he quickly hid. Where was the man's staff? He was sure that Brain had won before. Where had it gone? There was also the matter of the marks on Brain. The strange lines that the man wore before were fewer now, barely any left. What exactly did they mean? There was no more time for pondering stuff like this, however. Now was the time to fight. You're the boss of Oration Cease, aren't you? I'm lucky, I guess. It means I can beat you up myself. Big words from such worthless trash. Come on them. I see you have some hope. Allow me to crush it for you. Natsu rushed forward, his feet leaving the ground as the wings on his back took over. Brain's eyes actually widened as he noticed that the Dragon Slayer was flying, which gave Natsu the moment he needed to close the gap. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. Brain reached out and grabbed the flame-coated fist. Both pushed against each other, knowing whoever managed to win this attack would get a temporary advantage. Intense flames burst from Natsu's elbow, sending his fist crashing forward, the strength behind it greater than Brain was capable of blocking. He ripped his hand away from Natsu's attack, leaning to the side for the blow to sail right past him. Natsu had won that round, however, and made use of that momentary advantage. He spun round before even hitting the ground, his hands by his mouth as he took a deep breath. Fire Dragon's Roar. Massive torrents of flames erupted from Natsu's mouth, Brain barely having time to bring up an arm and use his magic. A dark green barrier appeared in front of him and around him, the flames harmlessly impacting against and around the shield. He could feel the intense heat radiating off the flames. So the fairy had some bite, did he? As the flames vanished, his barrier dropped, a fistful of dark energy flying towards Natsu. It was only as he flew through the remaining flames did he realize he had been caught. Natsu wasn't there. Two long clawed arms flew down at him, his instincts to move allowing him to avoid the flames at the last second. His hand shot out, the darkness in it being released as a whip to sever the long flame arms before they could do anything else. Natsu crashed down behind him, another fistful of intense flames being thrown at Brain's unprotected back. Brain dodged hurriedly, some of the flames nicking him as they passed. He prepared himself to grab Natsu by his back as the mage passed only to have a tail of flames grab him before he could do anything. He felt himself getting pulled towards the Dragon Slayer at an alarming speed, even as Natsu stopped his own motion and shot back at Brain. Fire Dragon's Sword Horn. Natsu's head smashed into Brain's stomach, the tail holding the dark mage in place for a moment before letting the man fly backwards, crashing into trees and knocking them to the ground. Natsu frowned as he watched Brain crash away from him. Something was wrong. The man felt weaker somehow. Was it because he was using all he had against Brain? Or maybe it was that lack of a staff. Some mages needed a catalyst to use their magic more effectively. He had seen Levi using hers after all, and she was much more powerful when using it than when she was not. So why didn't Brain have one anymore? Had he lost it? It hardly seemed likely. A tool like that was never lost if it was essential to your skills. So that left that he had willingly left it somewhere. But why? For what purpose? He took a moment to get his flames under control. He could worry about that stuff later. He couldn't see Brain yet, and he knew that attack hadn't finished the man off. It would have been a miracle if it had done. So he wouldn't fall for the man's trap. Brain was baiting him to come forward, and he couldn't risk it. He couldn't expend energy pointlessly right now. He could already feel the drain his fire drive was having on him. The more flames he used, the harder it would be to keep control of the spell, especially as it was constantly draining magic from him. A large blast of green energy shot out from the trees, red and orange energies mixed up around it as it shot towards him. Natsu dodged to one side, one hand launching the flame claws it had towards the source of the attack, intending to grab Brain and pull him out from hiding. Instead he felt a pain in his back as he got sent flying forward this time. His flames should have reduced the damage he was feeling by burning away some of the energy. So why had he still felt the attack so much? He glanced at the remains of the beam, noticing how small it was. Something that small had been so painful? He slowly got to his feet, seeing Brain walking out from the trees. "You're more impressive than I thought. I'll need to make sure I keep you alive for later. You'll make an excellent tool." Natsu winced as he finishing standing, the flames around his back repairing the fire drive's cloak as quickly as it had been destroyed. What the hell was that attack? Brain raised a hand once more, the dark green energy gathering around his palm before firing the energy outwards in the same form that the previous attacks had been in. Natsu dodged to the side only for Brain to twist his hand slightly, the attack bending back round to smash into Natsu. Flames rapidly increased around his hands and released the flames in front of the incoming attack. Fire Dragon's Wing Attack. The barrier of flames should have at least weakened the attack. That was what he had always had experienced. The flames would act as an offensive attack as well as a shield, and would also weaken or overpower the incoming attack alongside that. Yet Brain's attack broke through with ease, Natsu being hit once more by Brain's attack. Natsu winced, determined not to show any of the pain even as he crashed against the trees behind him. The flames of the fire drive repaired the damage it had taken in seconds, but it was already taking a toll on him. What the hell was that magic Brain was using? What was that spell? "Dark Capriccio," said Brain with a smirk on his face. "It doesn't matter what defense you have or what you put in its way. It is a piercing magic, something you won't be able to stop with your pathetic attempts of shields." Natsu scowled, the wings on his back beating in anticipation of his next move. He had to be careful. Those attacks were dangerous, he already knew that, but the hardest part was that dodged them didn't mean he was in the clear. If Brain could control them even more than just then, the attacks could come from anywhere around him. Before he could continue, his eyes widened. Brain caught his shock before turning his head, smiling wildly. That's it. Fire. Natsu could only stare and watch as massive amounts of energy appeared around a hole in one of Nirvana's sides, swirling as it all gathered to one focal point. Don't dash. Too late. And before Natsu's eyes, Nirvana fired, the beam heading straight for the airship in the sky. Straight towards Christina. Protector of the fairies. Jura couldn't hide his panic. Nirvana was preparing to fire, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. They were too high up, and Nirvana was too far away. If he had been closer, he could have used the earth to make Nirvana tilt at the last second. If they had been lower, he would be able to make the earth rise up to them in far greater amounts than he would be able to at the moment. The best he would be able to do would be to create a thin stone wall, and that wouldn't even delay Nirvana's attack. Jura. Jura looked at Ren and Eve as they ran into the room, both sparing a worried glance at their friend who was leaning asleep against the wall. Hibiki is fine, muttered Jura, barely able to concentrate on them. He was afraid right now. He rarely felt this fear, but he did now. It didn't matter that he was in danger. He had been in danger plenty of times. No, it was that no matter what he did he would be able to save anyone up here. Can any of you fly Christina? He asked, not even bothering to hide the desperation in his voice. Someone must know how. Ichiya does. Jura swore. He shouldn't have let Ichiya go after Brain if no one else could fly Christina. At the time he had assumed it would be Brain that would be firing Nirvana. But if it was firing now, Brain didn't need to be the one to do it. They had been fooled. Anyone else? Eve raised his hand hesitantly. I took a few classes when I was studying to be a rune knight. A few of us got the option because of our potential. Jura moved from the controls, almost dragging Eve over to them. Take control. Do whatever it takes to make sure that beam misses us when it fires. Get us as low as you can and I may be able to stop it myself. Eve nodded, already messing with a variety of switches and devices that Jura didn't even understand what they did. All he knew was that they weren't moving fast enough. Nirvana was rapidly preparing to fire, and they wouldn't be able to avoid it at this rate. If they were very lucky, perhaps the beam would just rip through the ship and miss the occupants on board. Ichigo. He was still in the hold below. So was Wendy too, along with both Sherry and Lucy. There was no time to warn them. He wouldn't make it in time. He could only pray they would be okay. Damn it. Eve kept glancing back and forth from the controls to Nirvana. I won't make it. If Hibiki was awake, he could do it. I'm sure of it. Do your best. Doing nothing is the same as lying down and waiting to die. He glanced towards where Ren was only to find him gone. He must have left once he had dragged Eve to the controls, likely warning the girls. At least they would be prepared now. He slowly left the room, heading round from the outside till he was in front of the cockpit and in direct line of the beam. Even if he couldn't bring much earth up to him, he would still try and weaken the blast. He would battle it with raw magical power as it hit him, even if it only delayed the blast by a few seconds. That would be more than enough to ensure everyone else's survival. Nirvana was almost ready. He could sense the tremendous amounts of magic being prepared to fire at them. His staff at his side, he stared the magic done, waiting. He was still afraid though. Being even closer to the magic highlighted that more than ever. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him but he didn't turn to face the person approaching. Go inside. Get somewhere safe. The person didn't appear to leave. Why weren't they? Couldn't they see what he was trying to do? I said get inside. Another set of footsteps appeared, signaling the approach of more people. He turned to see the people who had joined him. Ren was on one side while Eve was on another. Lucy and Sherry had joined them, and Wendy was lagging behind them. Even Hibiki had woken up, though he looked fairly weak at the moment. Where's Ichigo? He couldn't help but ask, seeing him as the only one being missing. He glanced at Wendy who slowly raised a hand. I couldn't stop him. Jura slowly turned, seeing Ichigo standing in the sky far ahead of them. He couldn't keep the horror out of his voice as his staff fell from his grip. What is he doing? As if hearing him, Ichigo turned round, his sword on his shoulders as he smiled at them. He could see everything Ichigo wanted to say to them in that one action. He was telling them not to worry. That he would never let a single drop of the blast past him. And he couldn't help but believe in him. That impossible fool, Jura muttered, a small hand slowly grabbing his. He looked to his side to see Wendy holding his hand, her other hand linked with Eve's. On Eve's other side was Lucy, who also held Hibiki's hand, while Ren was grabbing both his own free hand and Sherry's hand. We make our stand here then, muttered Jura, all eyes glancing forward at Ichigo. We'll put our faith in him. Protector of the fairies. Otai sped through the ground, his eyes picking up the energy gathering around Nirvana's main cannon even as he moved. He was running out of time. He had to make it. Urza had to have a way to contact the others. He had to warn them about Nirvana's attack before it was too late. Following Jalal had been the right move, he had believed, but when he had turned up he had found the man all alone. He had almost lost hope. The man had been sitting, or maybe collapsed would be a better way to describe it, against a tree, and had looked so free. He hadn't responded much when he had called him Jalal, but he had told him that Urza had gone further north, towards Nirvana itself. She had to be intending to try and reach it and find a way to stop it. And so he had followed her trail. It hadn't been too hard. A lot of the dark guilds that had served him and the other members of Oration Cease had been in this rough area, and she had been making her way through them one by one. It amazed him how each and every one of them was still alive. He supposed it wasn't too hard for her when she was that much stronger than them. The dark guilds under their command had been sources of income mostly, and it had been a way to keep the guilds in check. But he could almost see her now. And it looked like she knew he was coming. She had moved into an area densely packed with trees, something that would give her an advantage if she had to fight him, as his magic would be slightly less effective. He would have to do this carefully, but still quickly. He wasn't an enemy anymore, but she didn't know that. He had to make sure she listened to him before she tried to beat him up, else all would be in vain. In one swift moment, he left the ground, appearing a far distance away from Urza. She spun round to face him, but he immediately dropped to his knees, placing his head against the ground. Please, he begged. You need to listen to me. There isn't much time. Urza glanced from him to the energy preparing to fire from Nirvana. I don't have time to waste. I've already lost time speaking to one dark mage. I don't have time for you to delay me. She started to leave only for her leg to sudden freeze. She glanced down at it, seeing the earth holding it in place. She prepared to break it when she saw Otai's face, lifted back from the ground with desperation in his eyes. Please. There is no time. You won't make it. You need to warn your friends. Urza frowned, breaking the earth holding her foot. Otai made no movements to repair it, instead waiting and staring at her desperately. Urza took one look at Nirvana before taking a step forward towards Otai, doubt in her mind. The man was right. She would never make it in time, even in her fastest armor. This man had been her enemy, but she wanted to save her friends no matter what. And he seemed to be trying to help her. Why do I need to warn them? She asked. They could always dodge the blast. No, muttered Otai. They can't. A large group on the top of Christina, high in the sky with no hope in sight. And in that moment, they would turn to their greatest source of light to save them. Ichigo. Yes. The Shinigami. He's the key to everything here. He has been from the start. Urza frowned. You all beat him at the start. Why do you believe he is the trump card here? He knew. Otai could practically see the man he referred to in his mind. That man. He told us everything. How Ichigo would fight, how he would react, the buttons to press, and how to manipulate him into an ideal situation for us. He gave us everything on how to beat him, but Brain went further than that. Urza glanced up at Christina, seeing a figure in the distance in front of it. It was hard to make out, but she could tell who it was. Have faith in Ichigo. He'll protect them. No, Otai muttered, panic in his voice. Tell them all to abandon everything there. Jump, even if they'll die. Do you not understand? Brain planned everything from the start with the data we were given. Ichigo will do anything to protect his friends. Do you not get it yet? How Brain knew what you all would do, why Christina survived, even that Ichigo would likely find a way to live even if Wendy wasn't taken back from us. The target isn't Christina. It's him. It was him from the start. Nirvana. Urza's eyes widened and Otai nodded at her urgently. Darkness for light, and light for darkness. What Brain wants is the Ichigo when his darkness is released. Protector of the fairies. Ichigo stood his ground in front of the energy being gathered, his blade as his side. He was already in Bankai. He was almost as strong as he could get. And as the attack fired, he'd use his full power and blast the attack away. This was going to be risky. Nirvana would still be able to fire again later on. He could only save them from this blast. He was sure he could do it. He could feel Zanjutsu more clearly than ever. The ever-loyal spirit was practically placing a hand on his shoulder or as close to the same feeling as he could describe. He could hear words of encouragement being spoken in his head. Hell, even his inner hollow seemed to be awfully chatty, telling him things like he better not screw up, and that meant a lot coming from the hollow. The energy was prepared to fire. It would be coming any second now. He brought his sword behind him, black energy radiating off from the blade. His free hand reached towards his face and swiped, his usual bone-white mask appearing across his face. That instant made his magical power skyrocket, and he reached for as much as he could handle and then some. The energy around his blade swirled intensely and spread out from the blade, reaching across the area around him just like it had done when he had fought Laxus's strongest technique. This was likely close to everything he had, or at least everything he could muster. He wouldn't get a second shot. It was a do-or-die moment. There were people behind him, just like before. He couldn't let a single speck of energy through. He'd crush the blast with his own power, making sure it never made it past him. His feet gripped the air tightly, the wind even picking up from the large intense amount of magic swirling around in the air. He waited and waited and waited. Too early would mean death. Too late would mean death. He had to time this exactly right. The energy suddenly stopped gathering around Nirvana and then it fired, a large blast of black and white energy exploding across the space between it and him at an alarming pace. He could see now that Christina would never have stood a chance at escaping. But they no longer needed to. He was here. With one swing, the energy was released, creating what had to be his strongest Getchuga Tenshou that he had ever produced. He threw all the energy he had prepared against the attack, the two great blasts of energy fighting for dominance. For a moment he thought it wouldn't be enough. That he would lose. But he could see hope. The black energy of the Getchuga Tenshou was slowly breaking through, devouring the energy Nirvana was firing and seeming like it was becoming stronger because of it. It ripped through the last of the energy and tore across sky, ripping one of the legs off Nirvana as if it was paper. Nirvana began falling before the other legs acted, stabilizing it before it could hit the ground. Ichigo let out a sigh of relief, turning back to see the smiling faces of his friends. Yet all he saw was horror, their mouths open and shouting something despite how their voices weren't reaching him. He spun round and he realized what had made them so scared. And far away with Natsu, Brain smirked, looking up at the energy around Nirvana's main cannon. Now then, how will you stop the second shot? Protector of the fairies. Defeat those who would harm you. Jura and the others could only watch as Nirvana fired once more, Ichigo rushing to try and stop the second blast. They could already see he would be too late. It took less than a second to work out their choices. They had no way to go up, and they couldn't go to the sides even when they were at the controls. So that left one direction. Jura stepped forward, all the others having the same idea as he cried out to them. Jump. They leaped off the ship, but the beam was still rushing towards them. They weren't going to make it in time. And then Ichigo appeared, firing off a sudden blast of energy as he struggled to hold the power of Nirvana back. And Jura could see that he wouldn't. All they could see was a worried look in Ichigo's eyes as he looked back at them, the energy of Nirvana breaking through the Getchuga Tenshou. He could already tell that it wasn't himself that Ichigo was worried for, but for all of them instead. They all fell out of Nirvana's line of fire, a small sound coming from Ichigo's throat as if he was trying to say something. And then the remaining energy holding Nirvana's power back shattered, the blast tearing straight into Christina and devouring Ichigo in the blast. Ichigo. He wasn't the only one shouting. He could hear the others crying out to Ichigo too, Wendy almost in tears. She was far too young to be seeing someone die. But he regained hope for a moment. He could still feel Ichigo's power, and it felt like even the limited amount of magic that Ichigo had left was fighting back. But then the energy changed. Because Brain had been right when he spoke of how dark Ichigo's magic felt when using his Bankai. But it was nothing compared to this. Even as the remains of Christina fell alongside them, everything seemed to happen in slow motion to him. And the sudden bone-chilling roar seemed to last forever. And then the energy vanished, and Ichigo was standing there. But it wasn't Ichigo too. That was him, he was sure of it, especially with the bright orange hair. But it was longer now, stretching down to his waist. His skin was bone-white and his hands had claws on the end of them, the same as on his feet. The mask Ichigo had been wearing was much more menacing now, extending further around Ichigo's head with two bent horns attached to it, one on either side of the mask. And in the center of Ichigo's chest was simply nothing. Just a blank hole where a heart should have been. And the moment Ichigo finally stopped causing that terrifying roar, he was gone, leaving a booming sound in his wake. It only took him a brief moment to put everything that had just happened into the back of his mind, but the moment he could focus again. His eyes scanned the ground below, seeing the earth they were crashing towards. They wouldn't survive this if they didn't do something quickly. All their hands were still linked, however Ren suddenly released his grip and grabbed Sherry, giving a quick nod towards Jura to protect the others. He didn't waste a second, pulling Wendy further towards him, which drew the others closer to his grip. Eve found his grip suddenly pulled from Lucy, a large hourglass appearing around her and Hibiki, and from the look of surprise on her face she hadn't summoned it. That made things even easier. He held Eve and Wendy close to him, turning himself so he would take the brunt of the blow. He had a greater chance of being able to take it. Earth rose rapidly to meet them with his command, decreasing the distance they had to fall. But as they all came to hit the raised earth, it softened, the whole group crashing into a form of liquid earth and sliding down to the ground without being able to stop. They crashed out of the slide, sprawling into the ground in unnatural positions. Jura found his face planted against a tree with his legs hanging by the branches, with Eve and Wendy still held tightly against him. Ren and Sherry were luckier, with Ren's air magic helping to guide their descent. Still, the two of them were slumped on the ground on top of each other, both blushing heavily. Lucy and Hibiki had one of the strangest positions due to the hourglass, as the cloak had somehow bounced off the ground a bit and ended up hanging from some quite strong branches. "I am sorry, yes. Apologies for the abrupt landing, mages of the light." They all froze, their eyes flashing towards the newcomer who had apparently saved them. They wasted no time getting out of their awkward positions and up to face the member of Oration Cease. They would have attacked then and there if not for. "Stop that." Urza rushed into the area, positioning herself between Otai and the others. She held up her hand, her eyes wide, likely from what she had just seen above them. "He's on our side," she quickly said. There's not much time to explain, but Brain knew Ichigo would block the first shot against Christina. He counted on it. "So that's why Christina was allowed to escape," muttered Hibiki, his voice showing the weakness he was still feeling. "But dash. Guys." They all glanced to the sky, an eagle of ice flying down to them with Leon on its back along with an injured Gray. The eagle collapsed to pieces the moment it landed, and both ice mages almost collapsed to the ground. Wendy was already rushing to them the moment she saw Gray's injuries, her hands glowing with energy as Gray allowed the ice on different wounds to disappear. Urza marched over to Gray and Leon, kneeling by them and looking at them with concern. "Are you two all right?" "Never mind us," said Gray. "We saw Christina get blasted out of the sky. Is everyone all right here?" "Perfectly fine," stated Eve happily. His expression dropped as he stared back up in the sky where Ichigo had been. "Well, most of us are." "Did you hear that roar too?" Leon shivered. "I swear, it was the cry of a monster." "That may be truer than you think," said Jura seriously, glancing around the group. The situation is far worse than before. We can't fight in this situation. Oration cease is one thing, but this is something else. We need to evacuate to the edge of the barrier, and get as far away from Nirvana as possible. Hold on a second, argued Urza. That's monster you are referring to as Ichigo. Are you saying we should abandon him? Jura ignored her, turning to Otai. You are a member of Oration Cease. You gave Urza the information that Brain would fire to catch Ichigo in the blast, correct? Otai nodded. Yes. We were approached by a man a few weeks back. He had a way for us to awaken Nirvana. Before, we didn't even know exactly where it was. We still had 20 possible locations to search through. But this man not only knew where it was but also how to release it. He even said that the moment we begin to move, you all would know. He said Fairy Tail would get involved no matter what, and that the key to winning was to defeat Ichigo. And so he told you everything. Yes. Otai glanced at Jura. You don't seem as surprised as I would expect. A few things are making sense now. Did this man tell you how to use Nirvana? Did he tell you to use it against Ichigo? No, muttered Otai, half unsure of himself. But he also did, I think. I never thought it was possibly, but I think he manipulated Brain into planning to use Nirvana on Ichigo. Subtle hints on what Ichigo could do, and how destructive his hollow would likely be. And so Brain believes he can control Ichigo now that he has become nothing more than a monster with instincts. Jura scoffed. Impossible. You can't control a hollow. It can only be destroyed. Everyone spun to Jura, eyes wide. Hold on, said Hibiki, forcing himself towards Jura. You can't mean that the only solution is to kill Ichigo. Jura sighed sadly. It might be. A hollow will continue to devour things until it is destroyed. But Ichigo isn't a hollow. He's a Shinigami who has just turned into one. So there still could be a chance. It's possible. If Shinji was here he might know more. There is a way, yes. They all glanced at Otai, the man looking as if he had a burst of inspiration. What is it then? Otai pointed up at Nirvana. Those who are affected by Nirvana fall from light into darkness and those in darkness climb up into the light. However, those who try hard enough can recover. So Ichigo could still pull himself out of this. Jura shook his head. I don't know. That sounds more like hoping for the best. It'll work. They all froze as the new appearance, Wendy snapping her eyes to the newcomer as a faint trail of magic spread towards her. It's him. Most of the mages present didn't know exactly what Wendy meant, but Hibiki and Jura did. Jura pointed towards the man, earth launching from all sides to smash against him. The man chuckled before there was a flash of steel and the rock fell harmlessly to the ground. Honestly, I worked so hard on that entrance and you go and attack me the moment I show up. And here I waited for just the right moment for my dramatic appearance. You lot have no manners. They all stared at the man, barely able to be distinguished anything unique in his appearance. Most of his body was covered by a large black cloak, and a hood extended over his head to shield most of his face. They could see the faint bits of blonde hair hanging down between the man's eyes, however. As for the sword the man was holding, it was hard to tell much about it. It looked in perfect condition, and yet they all could tell that it was regularly used. The man held it in his right arm, however most of the hilt was hidden by the cloak, as if afraid it would give away the wielder's identity. It's you, muttered Otai, his eyes wide with shock. He's the man. He's the one that came to us. Jura stared at the cloaked man intensely. I thought so. You were watching us earlier. Why appear now? The cloaked man waved a hand at Jura, ignoring his question. Anyway, what Otai said will work. But you can't just expect him to stay still while you talk to him. Your only chance is to beat him into the ground. Don't worry about him dying. He's hard to kill. That is easier said than done. Then fight him for long enough and I'll bring him back to normal. All you need to do is survive, which is a lot harder than it sounds. Good luck. Jura moved to stop the man, but he vanished, not a trace to even follow. In all the time the man had been there, he hadn't once seemed to emit a single bit of magic, or at least not that he could detect. If it wasn't for Wendy, they likely wouldn't even know he had magic. Who? Who was that guy? Jura shook his head at Lucy's question. I'm not sure we even want to know. The plan chances very little. Urza, make sure they are all safe. Hibiki, send a message to Ichiya and Natsu the moment you get a chance. What about you? Asked Wendy. Where are you going? I'm going to face Ichigo. Alone. Hold on, said Ren. You can't do this all by yourself. I agree, said Leon. You can't expect us to abandon you and let you fight Ichigo yourself. Jura glared at them all. Don't have so little faith in me. In case you forgot, I am also a wizard saint. In the sky is where Ichigo has been at his strongest, but the ground is my domain. As long as there is earth I can reach, I won't be defeated so easily. Now go. Jura didn't wait for their responses, already leaving and heading towards the crash site of Christina. There was something he needed before he went to face Ichigo. He needed his staff if he was going to use that spell he had been working on. It just might make the difference between life and death. Protector of the Fairies. Cobra and Shinji were fighting when they heard the roar, both freezing for a moment and turning towards the source. They only got a glimpse of Ichigo as a hollow before he vanished, appearing far below on Nirvana before firing a massive zero across the city. Both Shinji and Cobra instantly increased the distance between them, not risking staying too close to Nirvana in case they were noticed. Shinji swore, his eyes locked on Ichigo as he began his rampage across the city. He knew exactly what this was. Hollowification, but at the worst possible level. Did Nirvana do this? Did it wake up his inner hollow that much that it took control? It was certainly possible, as his own inner hollow had been playing up since Nirvana had activated. Or maybe his was due to all the anger he had been feeling, and the hollow inside him had been more than willing to take advantage of that. The form was extremely humanoid. It meant that this wasn't just any normal hollow form. It was a vast lord, the strongest of all hollow forms. And things had seemed bad before. Cobra glanced down at Ichigo too. Damn, he's much more powerful than Brain said he would be. And he's a lot more out of control too. Shinji's ears picked up and he turned round furiously. You did this. Of course. 2 Nirvana shots, 1 direct hit, and bam. A wonderful destructive pet for Brain. You don't realize what you've unleashed? What dash images flashed through Cobra's head, all from Shinji's thoughts. He saw beasts ripping through men and women in lab coats, blasts of energy being fired to contain the creatures only for them to shrug the blasts off. All of the creatures had one thing in common. A white mask with a hole through their chest. Do you see, said Shinji urgently. You think you can control a hollow? They are more likely to devour you than listen to you. Cobra almost gave up for a moment, believing that Shinji was right. And then he squashed the urge, choosing to believe in Brain instead. Nice try. Now where were we? Shinji sighed. I better finish up here then and hurry to Ichigo. With a burst of shunpo, Shinji closed the distance, swiping at Cobra's head. The man saw through the move, dodging at the last second and launching his own strike up at the mage. Sharp claws tried to grab Shinji, but Shinji vanished once again, shunpo now being used to increase the distance. Cobra hadn't expected this Shinigami to be so tough. He had, though his poison would make short work of the man. The problem came in that the man was extremely tricky to hit. Neither of them had managed to land a proper blow, even with his ability to read his enemy's mind. Shinji had worked that out very early, and he had been forced to fight against the Shinigami, who suddenly was making their movements a lot more unpredictable in how they were chosen. It didn't help that he thought of them and used shunpo to jump forward and attack, decreasing the amount of time he had to react with. It was almost as bad as trying to dodge Ichigo's attacks. Almost. The strength the Shinigami had in the first place, however, had been a major problem. He had been forced to use Dragon Force at the start, relying on the tough scales to help protect him if an attack managed to break past and try and get a glancing hit. And the sharp claws certainly made him even more deadly. It also had the benefit of making it easier to use his poison magic. He was the Poison Dragon Slayer after all, and all of his poisons were more deadly and in greater amounts when he used this power. One thought was currently in Shinji's head from what he could hear. The man had gotten good at hiding the important stuff, but he still couldn't hide the things he would do next. He kept hearing one word being debated about over and over. Shikai. That was a Zanpakuto's release form if he remembered correctly. No matter what it was, it wouldn't change anything. And if it created an opening, he would be able to strike with his poison attacks. Still, it wouldn't be wise to even let Shinji get a chance to use it. Overconfidence would get you killed. He brought his arms back, the dark red poison gathering around his hands. Cobra swung at Shinji, the poison swirling and spiraling through the air at quick speeds. Shinji kept moving, ducking, and shifting past the poison blasts as he got closer. Shinji reached out with a hand as an orange-hued tendril shot from it, wrapping around Cobra's waist. With a sharp pull, Cobra was pulled through the air, heading towards Shinji's swinging blade. His arms rapidly came up in a cross shape in front of his body, twisting as much as he could to make sure his guard would be faced towards Shinji. Massive amounts of poison spread out around him, creating a large shield ahead of him. Shinji stopped his movement at the last second, redirecting the path Cobra was being pulled towards by using the kata to send him over him before releasing his hold on the spell. With Cobra freed from the kata's power, he fell through the air unhindered. That was Cubelios's cue to grab its falling master, pulling him back onto its back. Shinji didn't wait for Cobra to recover, pulling an arm back as a rod of blue and white energy generated in his hand. Bakuta number 62, Hyaporin Kan. The rod multiplied as it left Shinji's hand, a large number of the rods already targeting Cobra while the rest covered the area around him. Cobra could already hear what Shinji was thinking, even without his power. There was no room to dodge. So instead Cobra swung his arm, shouting, "Poison Dragon's Scales." As he did so, from the scales on his arms shot scales made of poison magic, colliding with the large amount of projectiles that had intended to hit him. Cubelios flew with the attack, using it as a shield to get its master close to the Shinigami. A magic seal appeared ahead of Cobra, a burst of poison swirling in front of it before being expelled forward, shaping itself into a jaw. Poison Dragon's Fang Thrust. Shinji dodged to the side, the poison almost touching him as it flew past. Cobra used the moment to jump off Cubelios, appearing above Shinji with poison around his legs. He rotated as he fell downwards, kicking towards Shinji as he drew close. Poison Dragon's Spiral Jaw. Shinji's eyes widened as he saw the attack, barely managed to raise a hand in time with energy being pushed into a hastily constructed spell. Hada number 4, Byakurai. The energy blasted out from Shinji's outstretched palm, colliding with the blast of poison. In that moment, Shinji released his grip on the air, letting gravity drop him down just in time to dodge the poison as it broke through his own attack. Cobra fell with Shinji, diving at him before he could escape. He was too late as Shinji vanished with a burst of Shunpo just as his hand was about to reach him. Cubelios shot below him, catching Cobra as the Dragon Slayer landed on his friend's back. "Yeah, Lord. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings dash. Oh no you don't," shouted Cobra, Cubelios sending him up towards Shinji rapidly as swung a fist of poison magic at Shinji. Shinji only dodged, his focus split between the spell's incantation and avoiding the attack, making him not risk using Shunpo. "Yeah, who bears the name of man? Truth and temperance, upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash but slightly the wrath of your claws." Cobra swiped with his arm, firing a burst of poison scales at Shinji in an attempt to stop him before it was too late. He could hear the man's thoughts however, signaling his failure. Hada number 33, Sukatsui. A massive burst of energy blasted forward, exploding outwards as a wave of energy that threatened to consume Cobra completely. Cobra raised his arms in a cross guard, poison that he had used in the scales abandoned its futile attacks to break through the blast. A majority of the scales had already been destroyed as they collided with the wave and he needed to be faster. It was just when the attack reached him that he had gained enough poison, it instantly spreading out ahead of him to shield against the attack. In the end, it wasn't enough. The attack only halted for a moment before blasting through, colliding with Cobra. Luckily for the Dragon Slayer, his guard had weakened the attack greatly. The energy quickly vanished after impact, leaving him with only a few burns along his skin. He didn't hear anything from Shinji though, or at least not anything to do with an incoming attack. In fact, the Shinigami's mind seemed more peaceful than before, still angry but now controlled. It was scarier in a way. Before it had been vicious and expressive in Shinji's thoughts, but now it was simple and precise. With the energy clearing, he got another look at Shinji. Barely anything seemed different, except for one primary thing. The strange eye had reverted back to its normal form. "That's much better," said Shinji, calling over to Cobra. "Thanks for staying down for a moment. I needed that time to get this little problem of mine back under control." Images flashed in Cobra's head, seeming very similar in style to the hollows he had seen before in Shinji's memories. He could hear a howl of pain, but it was quickly crushed, Shinji's own mind suppressing it so deep that Cobra could no longer hear it anymore. "Now then, I'm sorry I kept you waiting here. I've been fighting a bit too brutish, and an enemy like you isn't the kind I should be crushing with brute force. So you won't use your hollowification?" asked Cobra, smugness in his voice. Instead of being surprised at Cobra knowing that, Shinji smirked. "Of course not. Besides, I'm more of a trickster anyway." Shinji brought up his blade in front of him, the point aimed upwards towards the sky. "Collapse, Sakanade." And as Shinji said the name of his Zanpakuto, Cobra could swear that the sword had turned upside down for a moment. And as quickly as that flash happened, Shinji's Zanpakuto had changed, the pommel of the blade altering to become a large ring the size of Shinji's head. The rest of the blade was similar to how it was before, however the guard had extended up the blade a few inches and, along the rest of the blade, 5 holes were in the blade at equal distances from one another. The blade slowly began rotating as the ring spun, however Shinji wasn't even holding it. His hand simply rested in the middle of the ring, the sword rotating around his arm despite the lack of contact. Cobra stared at the blade. What the hell kind of advantage would a sword like that give? Some extra rotation power? Remote control of the blade? A thing like that would be tricky but not impossible to deal with. In the end, it would rely on the user's thoughts after all. Still, what that been that image he had seen? Was it something from Shinji's mind? No, it couldn't have been. He had the glimpses in his mind, separate from his own sight. But he had seen the inverted sword with Yu's own eyes. "Oh? What's this? Do you smell something nice?" Cobra sniffed at the air, his enhanced senses picking up a very distinctive smell. It was hard to say what it was exactly, but it was definitely there, and it was very pleasant smelling too. And was it a trick he was seeing, or was a faint mist appearing around him? Was this poison of some kind? He could hear Shinji's thoughts, waiting for him to breathe it in. And it would have been too late if he didn't want to anyway. It was in the air itself, and he had already taken a few small gulps of it. Still, poison was no threat to him. It only restored his own strength and magic. Honestly, what was the man thinking? It's not poison. Cobra's eyes widened, his magic reading his opponent's thoughts to try and identify what he had breathed in. There wasn't a name for the smell, but a hint of fear had sprouted inside him at the implications of what he could hear. "Welcome to the inverted world." And then the world reversed itself, everything being turned upside down. He glanced around in panic, slowly realizing that despite how it looked, he wasn't falling off. Interesting, isn't it? Sakanade here has the nifty little ability of messing around with my opponent's sense of direction. Up is down, and down is up. Shinji suddenly rushed forward, his sword slashing at Cobra from his right. "And left is right while right is left," stated Cobra, the implications making him less worried than before. "That's it? That's your grand Shikai? Such a pathetic illusion? All I need to do is dodge correctly." Cobra reached out to the left with a clawed hand, intending to grab Shinji's arm as he dodged the blade. However, as he was about to make contact, a cut flashed across the scales, a trail of blood flying through the air. Cobra winced, glad he had pulled back at the last second as he had heard the laughter in Shinji's voice. But how? He had made to block the blade correctly. He just reversed the attack's direction that he saw incoming and attacked the opposite to what he saw. It should have worked. So why? Why had he been harmed from the right side when he had done everything correctly? You guessed wrong. Shinji gave Cobra a mocking smile, infuriating the Dragon Slayer. It's more than directional sense that gets altered. Your eyesight, the direction my attacks come from, where you get injured, nothing is safe from my power. Shinji charged in again, forcing Cobra to desperately try and block the incoming attacks. He got lucky with some, but others managed to chip away at his scales. Only his ability to read the Shinigami's mind was keeping him alive right now, and even that wasn't exactly enough. Can you reverse it all in your head? No. No one can. Taoshiro couldn't, Ichigo couldn't, and you have no chance either. It's impossible. To prove his point, Shinji bypassed Cobra's guard completely, slashing at his chest. Cobra felt the pain as he fell backwards, Cubelios pulling him away as quickly as possible. Shinji let them fall back, the same mocking smile on his face as before. You train to become stronger. You become stronger to fulfill a certain desire, whether it be to protect people, to enslave them, to kill them, or even just to live. That strength keeps you alive, and it helps you develop the instincts we all use in battle. Those feelings that keep us alive. The ones that make us take advantage of a sudden opening or to block an attack on reflex. Shinji glanced at his blade, a softer smile on his face as he looked at the blade. But my Sakanade doesn't like people getting cocky in their own power. She just loves making it hard for people to fight and tries to mess with them as much as possible. She's such a pain sometimes, I swear. And she unleashes a lot of her frustration on people when I release her, since I rarely do so. Shinji glanced back at Cobra, the smile returning to how it was before. Those instincts you train so hard with are useless here. She forces them to all fail you, because your body can't help but react to what you see. Because why would the feelings that always kept you alive now be leading you to your death? Your mind can never comprehend it as much as it may try. I see. Cobra stood back up on Cubelios, looking more confident than before. So that's how it works. That makes things that much easier. I don't need to waste time having to figure it out with you telling me its secrets. Let's go, Cubelios. Cubelios charged forward, poison spewing from its mouth. Cobra breathed it all in, taking strength from it and refilling his reserves. He could do this. He didn't need to just use his eyes. It only tricked the sight, but it wouldn't fool his hearing. He could hear exactly which way Shinji would attack from. And that was all he needed to break through. Poison Dragon's Fang Thrust. A large burst of poison spread forward, shaping itself into a set of fangs. Shinji dodged round to the side, slashing at Cobra as he approached. The attack slid over Cobra's head, however, as the mage ducked. Who cares if the directions are all reversed? Right can't be up or down no matter what you do. Shinji showed a smirk as he brought the blade spinning back round, using the circle at the end of the hilt to rotate the blade with. Cobra leaned to the side, punching forward with a blast of poison. It didn't even hit Shinji, however, as the man was suddenly out of his sight, a ripple of pain stretching across his arm as the blade nicked it as it struck. Again his hearing had saved him. He had sworn that Shinji had been in front of him, but what did he expect exactly? It was like flipping a coin to decide whether an attack would hit or not. He spun round, his arm swiping in the air as scales of poison flew at Shinji. His eyes watched as Shinji dodged them all, but his mind was already running through a plan as he read the mage's thoughts on dodging. It seemed that a widespread attack would be most effective. It didn't matter if he couldn't properly hit Shinji normally so long as he got just a bit of poison to make contact. Just the tiniest bits of contact and it would be his win. Cubelios spilled out poison, and he used it with his own, pulling a large chunk of his magic up to the surface for what he wanted to do. Poison swirled around his arms, rapidly spiraling around and around them in multiple loops. He brought his arms above his head as the poison spirals linked towards one another, forming a massive spiraling torrent of poison around his entire body. Dragon Slayer's secret art, corrosive spiral. The poison around Cobra turned even more vicious as he swung his entire body towards where Shinji was, the magic flying through the air and spreading out all around Cobra, even behind him. Even if he got the direction wrong, he wouldn't miss. Just a single touch was all that was needed. The poison spread out more as it traveled, spiraling around as the name suggested. Shinji's eyes widened before he regained his composure, rapidly using bursts of shunpo to avoid the deadly poison. Cobra was listening, however, hearing the man's thoughts. He listened carefully, hearing where Shinji was in relation to his poison. He took control, forcing the spirals of poison to focus more intensely on that area. But all he ended up hearing was victory for some reason. He turned his head to where Shinji had been, glad he had made sure to attack all around him. He saw the enclosed gate that the poison had formed, and ignored all the warnings he could feel. There was no way that he had failed. He had broken out that secret art for a reason. True to its name, it was far more dangerous than his normal poison. It was also why it was so costly on his reserves. No matter what Shinji tried, it would not work. His poison was far too deadly. He glanced at his arms. The scales were shattered in half a dozen places, and the remaining ones weren't in any better condition either. He was getting low on magic too. He only had a bit more magic left before he would be forced out of Dragon Force. But as the poison finally separated, Shinji wasn't there. His eyes widened in both shock and fear. That was impossible. He had heard correctly, he knew it. He had made sure to act correctly. So why had he failed? Ah. So was that it? Was that your grand finale? Cobra snarled, trying to grab the man who had suddenly appeared behind him. He met thin air however before he felt nothing but pain, a blade slashing along his back. He fell to one knee, glancing back behind him to see Shinji, a cold look in his eyes. You have good hearing, to even hear my thoughts. But did you honestly think that would let you win against me? Shinji sighed, bringing up his sword and resting it against him. That plan of yours at the end was smart, but you made mistakes. The first was to assume all you heard was correct. It was a simple matter to hide my thoughts with different ones. I still should have heard them, snarled Cobra. True, you should have. But there comes the second issue. Maybe you did hear them, and maybe you didn't. But let me ask you, whatever made you assume everything I thought was the correct action? Shinji lifted the blade back up, letting it spin around his arm. Left is right, he muttered as the sword swung that way before it suddenly changed directions. And now right is right once more. I'm more than capable of switching between the two with a simple thought. And then what you thought you saw was actually right, but you were too focused on ignoring it. The sword stopped spinning and Shinji grabbed onto the hilt of the sword. I can include myself in her effect too. And I can reverse things as many times as I want, and chose what I want to be reversed. You tricked me, Cobra said in shock, trying to force himself upwards. Shinji refused to let him move, kicking him off Cubelios before dodging the snake's attack and throwing it away from him. He sped after Cobra, landing near where the man's body had fallen. Why did you not keep thinking when I told you my Zanpakuto's technique? Because that was all you thought it would do. Present an answer to someone and they will rarely look any further. You lost because you gave up searching for another solution and accepted what you were told. And that is why you will die here. Shinji suddenly shot down with his blade, Cobra closing his eyes as he waited for the inevitable fate ahead of him. He even closed off his hearing, not wanting to hear the attack as it headed towards him. But then nothing happened. And still nothing happened a moment after that. The blade should have hit him by now. So why hadn't it? His eyes slowly opened, and he wished they hadn't. His hearing snapped to full alert as the body in front of him fell on him. He could have taken death. He could have taken one of his allies falling on him. But he couldn't handle her like this. Never her. But the body of Cubelios fell on him anyway, a blade slashed along its body. His mind tried to piece together what had happened. Had Cubelios taken the blow for him? Had she tried to save him, and had gotten hurt instead? He couldn't hold back the tears as he gripped his friend tightly, desperately looking for a sign that it was a lie. She couldn't die. Not her. She was the only one he couldn't lose. Cubelios. Damn it, Cubelios, speak to me. Cubelios. He didn't care that Shinji was watching him, the tears falling from his eyes as he tried to get his friend to respond. Cubelios. Cubelios. Eric. Cobra felt the stream of tears get worse, Cubelios barely managing to get those words out of its throat. He had never heard her speak. Not once. She had always communicated in hisses or he had used his hearing to understand her. But she had never spoken as she was now. And it had to be her because no one else knew that name. His name. My. Eric. I'm here, Cobra muttered, cradling Cubelios as close to him as possible. I'm here. My name. I want to hear you say it. What are you talking about? Asked Cobra. I'm saying it to you now, aren't I? Not that one. Kainana. I want you to call me it. Cobra nodded. His voice was weak but he managed to get the words out, plastering a smile on his face for Cubelno. For Kainana to hear. Kainana. He swore he could see a smile on Kainana's face, the snake falling limp in his arms. Thank you. Eric. Hey. Please. Don't leave me. Cobra tried shaking Kainana's body. Kainana. Please. I'm begging you. You can't die. You can't leave me. Please. A blade appeared at his throat but it brought him no more fear. My prayer, he muttered to himself sadly, his grip weakening on Kainana's body. I just wanted to hear the voice of my one friend. I always wanted to hear you speak to me. So why did you have to do it as you died? He looked up at Shinji, showing a look of pure despair. Kill me. Shinji actually froze. He wanted to kill this man so much for harming Ichigo, but that look was halting his blade. He tried to continue moving but he couldn't. And in the end, he didn't try. He just took his blade and let it revert back to its normal form, turning around and walking away. Hey. Come back here. Shinji glanced over his shoulder, shaking his head. I've got no quarrel with killing you, but I won't kill someone who's lost off hope and reason for living. You won't even fight back, and I'm not going to be your method of suicide. Then I'll make you. Cobra lunged at Shinji, the last of his magic gathered around his fist. This was the real thing he was seeing. The ability Shinji had been using was no longer active. He wouldn't be taken by a trick. Shinji dodged each wild strike that came at him, a mix of pity and annoyance shone on his face. Cobra didn't care what the man thought of him, however. All that mattered was that he could be with his friend. He had sworn to her once that they would always be together. And of course she had looked at him in that way that asked him what if they were separated. Well, his answer had been extremely simple. He'd always find his way back to her. They had been together since the Tower of Heaven, and he wouldn't ever accept being separated from her. Running through fire, riding a shooting star, even death would not keep him from her. Shinji suddenly shot past him, slamming the pommel of his sword against Cobra's skull. The Dragon Slayer fell forward, the hit knocking him to the ground. Somehow they had ended up back at Kainana's body, and he was lying by her once more. His hand reached out to her, resting on her skin. He forced himself back up. He could see it in Shinji's eyes now. The man could see that he wouldn't give up. He was going to fight him seriously again. Cobra brought up his fists, even though he could no longer summon any more magic. And as he took a step forward, a clawed arm shot straight through his chest, grabbing his heart and crushing it to pieces. Protector of the Fairies. Brain dodged the blast of flames and retaliated with his own attack, dark energy spiraling around Natsu before closing in from all sides. Natsu didn't even flinch, the flames around him blasting outwards and incinerating the opposing magic. His wings took him high up into the sky, at which point he could generate powerful flames in each hand. With a flame on the right hand and a flame on the left, when you combine them together, Fire Dragon's brilliant flame. He released the blast downwards, aiming straight at Brain. Brian raised a hand, a shield of magic forming around him as the attack made contact with him. The flames had grown so intense that the unfortunate trees to get caught in the blast simply vanished, burned till there was nothing left. Even the ground was breaking from the intense power the attack had. Brain, however, was unharmed, his shield cracked but not broken. Brain quickly responded with a dark Capriccio blast as Natsu flew down at him. Natsu pulled his wings around his body, rolling to the side at the last second so that the blast shot straight past him. He felt it almost touch his skin, a small wince being hidden as best as he could from the accidental contact. The moment he was past it, his wings shot back out, pulling him up out of his dive just as the magic blast that he had dodged shot back where he had been. Flames intensified around his leg and it shot down at the blast like he had done with his flame arm constructs. The flames smashed against the homing attack and destroyed it, the flame leg still going till it hit the ground. Natsu quickly brought the rest of his body down to the ground, using the grip on the ground to pull him down faster. Another blast of brains shot over his head, but he swung his arm at where it was and released another burst of flames at the attack before it could try and continue its assault. The moment he reached the ground, a burst of flames expelled from Natsu's feet, sending him rocketing at Brain. Brain brought up an arm, a quick shield appearing around it. Natsu's fist collided with it and the shield began to crack. Before it could, Brain struck out with his free hand, forcing Natsu to block it with his own. Both mages pushed against the defenses of one another, observing the movements they made and trying to work out how much effort to exert to break through. Brain was, unfortunately for Natsu, the smarter of the two by far. The energy around his fist glowed brighter and gained a more sinister appearance than before. Faces seemed to float up from the ground to the energy, each showing looks of pure and unadulterated horror. Natsu realized the threat and tried to pull back, but doing so weakened his assault on Brain's shield, allowing him the opportunity he needed. Brain's fist pushed through as Natsu tried to retreat, the energy blasting straight at Natsu, who only had time to show a burst of fear before the attack connected. Dark Rondo. Natsu sped out of the blast a moment later, his wings helping to clear as much of the blast as possible. It had ripped straight through everything around it. Even the ground was deeper now, a perfectly semi-spherical hole in the ground where the attack had been. He landed, thought it was more of a crash, and his wings vanished from the fire drive. He swore silently. That attack had hit him like the flames hadn't even been there. Or maybe it would be more correct to say that it had simply absorbed the flames in part of the blast. It had simply devoured everything in its path. He glanced at his right arm, the flames missing from the cloak. And he couldn't repair it now. The wings had vanished for a reason after all. He was reaching his limit. He couldn't keep this up for very much longer. Already most of the flames had abandoned him, and he could see the rest of it was struggling to stay in existence. He had hoped he could have won before this happened. Before his time with the magic ran out. And now he was almost dry, not even enough to use a secret art at low strength. He glanced up at Nirvana in the distance, hidden behind the barrier. He had heard the howl before, even from where he and Brain had been. Brain had only smiled when he heard it, exclaiming it was his victory today. And of course that had made him mad, especially when Brain had gone on to state how the monster making that noise was Ichigo. And he wished he hadn't been told that. His flames had gone out of control as he had tried to beat Brain into the ground. Sure, they had been more intense and powerful, but he had drained at least half his reserves in about a minute. Was Ichigo okay? He knew now that, no matter what he did, he couldn't beat Brain alone. He could try, and right now he was still holding on to hope that he could win, but he needed an extra helping hand. And had Ichigo even beat all the mages back there? There had been a lot of them after all. Happy had to be somewhere watching, looking for the moment where he would be needed. That would likely be at the point where he would be collapsed on the ground, and Happy would desperately try and get him to safety, if Brain even let him, that is. Brain sat and froze, Natsu spotting how the man raised a hand slowly to his face and frowning. Even from the distance he was at, Natsu could see a mark vanishing from Brain's face. It seemed Cobra fell. I wonder what killed him. It's no matter. He had his uses, but I have Nirvana now. I can always find new soldiers. Natsu scowled. They were the man's comrades, and yet he dismissed their worth as easily as that? It was disgusting. Still, there was good news. That meant one more member of Oration Cease had fallen, and they were that bit closer to winning. So I'm the last, it seems. Natsu frowned as Brain suddenly started laughing. Brain stated he was the last one, so that meant he was the only enemy left. Yet why was that so funny to Brain? Why was he smiling when all his allies were beaten? Brain tilted his head towards Nirvana, his smile growing wider as he took it in. Nirvana is mine, and my lovely little pet is running wild. Still, he's far stronger than I even anticipated. It seems that I won't be able to control him until I've got the leash on. A flash of light appeared around Brain's right hand, which revealed a small dagger as it vanished. I didn't plan to do this originally, but I suppose I should thank you all. My original plan had involved all of the other generals being undefeated in battle. It hasn't affected my crucial goals, but it has now opened the door to victory. What the hell are you saying? Demanded Natsu. Are you saying that you don't care that your allies were beaten? Not at all. If they had still been standing, it would have made things difficult now. Ichigo is far more of a monster than I believed. So I have only one choice left. In one swift moment, Brain raised the dagger and stabbed it down into his chest, holding back the urge to cry out from the pain. Natsu's eyes grew wide as he watched, unable to understand what the man was doing. Hey! Are you trying to die or something? Brain chuckled. Not at all. I have a prayer, just like all of the other generals. For me, it was for at least one of Oration Cease to keep standing, no matter what happened. So long as they did, the 6 prayers would hold. The last mark on Brain's face slowly started vanishing, Brain's hand coming to his head and holding it tightly, as if in pain. Only a monster can control a monster. I can't be Brain right now. Knowledge isn't necessary. I have to be someone who can win against him. What I need is power. I have to abandon myself and become another. The very air seemed heavy to Natsu as he watched Brain slowly changing. Brain's hair became wavier while his eyes changed to a blood-red color. The skin became far paler too, and even the grin on the man's face seemed more menacing than before. When the 6 pillars which hold me up have fallen, all that is left is destruction. And then Brain was gone, and Zero was reborn. Protector of the fairies. Bring the light back to the surface. An orange-haired man rushed through the trees, his suit in pieces. He was no longer as small as he had been before, now sporting large muscles and a height twice of what he was before. This was his power perfume spell at work. He had tried to use stealth originally, and he had done well with it to begin with. A third of their numbers had already been taken out before they noticed something was wrong. And then it had all gone downhill. He wasn't a fighter like Natsu, which meant it was hard to deal with them, especially in such large numbers. He could increase his speed with Fleetfoot perfume, zero-distance inhalation, which was a mouthful to say out loud, and he could dull his pain with pain-relieving perfume, but he only had so many spells that worked in open combat. Paralyzing perfume had been most effective with stealth, and now that they saw him using it they had become wary of his spells. So they kept a distance slightly when not attacking and reacted when he tried to use it against them. As much as he hadn't wanted to, he had been forced to use his power perfume. It was a special spell that he had that caused his body's muscular structure to expand, increasing in size and becoming denser. If he had ever seen Laxus's incomplete dragon force, it could have been compared to that in the expansion that took place. From that moment on, he had stormed through the remaining mages. There had been some tricky ones, but they were all too weak to be able to handle more than one punch, sometimes multiple mages getting taken out with the others. The moment he had been sure that they were all defeated, he had immediately begun heading towards Natsu's location. Carla flew above him, unable to carry him as he was. The spell's downside was that it took a while to wear off, and he was also glad of that in a way. He always felt completely exhausted when the spell ended because he was using so much of his physical strength and magic in it that he drained it all drastically. But he could still keep up. Combining the speed he got from one perfume with the form he was in meant he could move quite fast, keeping up with the cat in the sky above. Carla said that she had seen signs of fighting up ahead, and he had to be close now. He charged through the trees, not bothering trying to be stealthy. That would take up time, and he already was afraid for Natsu. He had been forced to fight Brain alone, even if he did have a greater fighting chance, and that worried him. Because Brain was the leader of Oration Cease for a reason. He didn't want to arrive and see Natsu's fallen body. His intention to help in the fight was unneeded, and he desperately wished it had been. Because there was no Brain here. Carla said she had seen a fight going on, and he could see the impact it had on the area around him, but then where were the 2 mages? Where was Natsu? Over here. Ichigo turned towards the cry from Happy, rushing over. He was already reaching for a test tube when he reached Natsu's fallen body, bringing it up under the mage's nose and letting the dragon slayer breathe it in. He glanced over Natsu's body. He could see a flicker of flames around him on the grass, but it was so very faint. Natsu himself was bruised all over, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. It would definitely be broken and he would need to get someone to look at it later on. The usefulness of his perfume at healing was limited, and Wendy would be a far greater choice to fix Natsu up. Natsu's eyes snapped open, locking onto his own. Ichiya stared back, seeing the desperation in the Dragon Slayer's eyes. Brain. Natsu coughed harshly, Ichiya instantly there with his magic to try and relieve Natsu of his pain. Rest now. It's okay. No. He's still out there. Brain. 0. Nirvana. Natsu's eyes closed once again, Ichiya realizing Natsu had fallen unconscious once more from his wounds. What happened to him? Ichiya asked softly, turning to Happy in concern. For Natsu to have forced his mind to awaken at his appearance just to pass on a few words meant a lot. Natsu's voice had a trace of fear in it. Exactly what had happened to make him so worried? And who or what was Zero? He hurt Natsu. Happy could barely stop his body from shaking, his eyes darting side to side as if something terrifying might appear. Brain. He stabbed himself. Natsu thought. He thought Brain was trying to kill himself. But he wasn't. Ichiya placed a comforting hand on Happy's small shoulder. He wasn't sure how successful he was at calming down the small cat, but he felt the shaking subsided somewhat. What happened then? He asked, making sure he spoke as calmly as he could. He didn't want to make Happy jumpy right now, especially as only Happy could tell him what was going on. Zero. He's the master of oration cease. Zero. So Zero was a person, it seemed. But if Zero was the guild master, then that left only one question. What about Brain? Happy shivered. Brain. He changed. He became Zero. A split personality, muttered Ichiya. I've heard of the condition, but Brain had it. He froze, the gears clicking into place. The markings on Brain's face. The rumor of organic link magic. He sealed his personality away. And if he changed, it is likely that it could have been linked to all of Oration Cease and that they held Zero back. Why do you think that? Because you're terrified. For that personality to have been sealed away means that even Brain was afraid of it. And yet he set it free. Ichiya turned his head towards Nirvana, feeling a sense of unease. Where did Zero go? To Nirvana. Happy looked down at Natsu. He was gloating to Natsu. He beat him so easily, and Natsu was already beaten up from Brain. He couldn't stop him. I see. Ichiya reached down to Natsu and picked him up. We need to return to the others. Hopefully no one is near Nirvana. He's going for Ichigo, muttered Happy. He's going to try and capture him. Capture Ichigo. Ichiya glanced back at Nirvana. What is happening up there? I heard a howl from somewhere. That's Ichigo. Ichiya took in the words, taking a deep breath. I see. We're staying away from there then. Carla glanced at Ichiya nervously. Shouldn't we help Dash? How can we? Ichiya looked back down at Natsu. Natsu's beaten up this badly, and I'm not in the best condition to fight despite how I may look. And if Zero was as powerful as I think he was, it means that Ichigo must be a massive threat right now. I can't beat him. But someone else might. But who? Ichiya smiled. We've still got Jura out there. He's completely fresh for combat. I believe in him. He won't fail us. I'm sure he'll save Ichigo. Now let's go. We've got to find the others. I saw Christina get destroyed, but I'm sure they're still out there somewhere. We just need to get back into the barrier and to find them. Carla frowned. But how? You don't want us to fly with Natsu, so how can we get to the barrier's gate? Ichiya sighed, realizing the flaw in his plan. He didn't have an answer for that. Luckily, someone else did. I'll handle that for you. Protector of the Fairies. Shinji stared at the body of Cobra's before the hand that had grabbed the Dark Mage's heart was pulled out of the man's body. Cobra fell to the ground lifeless, his eyes still open in shock from the sudden attack. The man's body had fallen by his snake friend, something he felt the man would be happy with, even if he was dead. His attention shot back to the newcomer. He took in the claws and white skin, paying a lot of attention the hole in the person's chest and the white mask on the person's face. The horns were extremely menacing, likely capable of piecing something with ease. Ichigo. He took a step forward before Ichigo sudden roared, his body bending slightly to have the points of the horns aimed toward him. Quicker than he ever thought possible, a massive zero formed between the horns before blasting towards him. Shinji barely had time to react before the zero was crashing into where he had been standing. He had barely reappeared a distance away when he felt every instinct he had screaming at him. His blade came up on instinct, blocking an overhead strike from Ichigo. A clawed hand lunged at him but Shinji allowed it to shot past him, his own hand coming up and being placed against Ichigo's chest. Hada number 54, Hyene. A blast of purple energy exploded from Shinji's palm, transforming into flames as it connected against Ichigo after traveling the tiny distance between the two. Ichigo howled, retreating backwards and swinging his sword wildly. It gave Shinji some breathing room to think. How was he going to deal with this? This was nothing he had ever had to deal with before. It kind of made him happy there hadn't been any massive problems like this when Ichigo first had to get his hollow under control. This hollow form was monstrous in its strength. It still held Ichigo's Bankai blade, which meant that it had all of Ichigo's power flowing through him too. And add the hollow magic on top of that and you had a lot of problems. He could already see the flames of his attack being disposed of, Ichigo using his own blade to rip the skin off his body. It seemed there was some sense still there, however it was more instinct than anything else. That and a desperate need to devour everything. With the instant regeneration at work, Ichigo's torn flesh regrew in an instant, leaving not a single mark or singe. That had been a level 54 Hada spell, something that should have been much more effective. The spell itself was meant to burn its target horribly until they were wiped from existence. Until you managed to overpower it at least. The flames should have at least done more damage than they did. Ichigo had taken a blast from Nirvana, and that had changed him. When he had fought Cobra earlier, he had felt his inner hollow trying to take control. Nirvana had been causing that, he was sure of it. So it was likely that the magic had the ability to reverse something. Light and dark. It could explain why he had felt so much anger, even with his reasoning. So if the mere presence of Nirvana had caused him to start losing control, could a full blast have tipped the scales completely? Before Ichigo had been a Shinigami with hollow powers. But could the scales have tipped enough that he had become a hollow with Shinigami powers? If that was the case, it meant Ichigo would likely have a arrow of some sorts. There could be any range of how strong it was, but he would say it likely was only average right now. The attack had still done a fair amount of damage before Ichigo had healed from it, and he had heard the screams. Well, howls would be a proper description, as Ichigo had suffered from them. Still, Ichigo's form indicated that he had to be a Vastolord, and he certainly had the power to back it up. The weight against his blade had been nothing to laugh about. A good hit would be drastic. What about his speed, however? That would be the major factor in this battle. If Ichigo just acted as a berserker, he was sure he could contain him. But if Ichigo had any intelligence left at the moment, he'd. His entire mind cut off any thoughts that interfered with his concentration, blocking the sudden strike that had come from behind him. Ichigo lunged forward, his sword slicing across Shinji's side as he tried to dodge. Shinji threw himself backwards, only needed a moment to summon his hollow mask to his face. His power jumped as he felt the additional energy flowing through his body. And so Ichigo's attack came slower to him as the same maneuver happened again. His suspicions were definitely right on the increased hollow factor. That was Sonito Ichigo was using. It made it far easier to bypass his senses, and he was forced to rely on everything he had to deal with it. Ichigo wasn't as fast as he remembered him being though. He slid under the blade as it swung over his head, stabbing his only sword forward against Ichigo and slashing down against his arm. There was a fair amount of resistance, but his blade wouldn't be stopped, not with his hollow mask on after all. The blade separated the arm in one swift motion, it falling limp to the ground as Ichigo's sword clattered against the ground. A familiar kata generated as he flung the orange tendril of energy at Ichigo, allowing it to wrap around Ichigo's other arm. Ichigo had a lot of strength, but he also got strength from his hollow powers. He swung the energy, throwing Ichigo against one of the nearby buildings and causing it to collapse down on his friend as the supports shattered. Damn. He knew he was in trouble. That wouldn't keep Ichigo down. If this kept up, he'd be forced to use his Shikai once again. He didn't like to turn it against an ally, even if Ichigo was treating him as an enemy at the moment. It felt wrong. But he doubted he'd have a choice. However, he'd only be playing for time in the end. He wouldn't be able to deal a killing blow, the risk of taking Ichigo down permanently too much to even try. Things would have been so much easier when they first met, but he'd been with the guy for 3 years now. He was part of the only family he had, and he couldn't lose that. Not after losing all the others. At the very least, he wouldn't have to worry about that phantom step move. It had been developed with faster speed than he was seeing now, and the subconscious use of Sonido meant it was being favored. If that got used for speed, the phantom step would lose the ability to lose trackers as the user moved. A glint of red energy shone out from the rubble before it was all blasted away, a massive Zero tearing through it like paper. A clawed hand shot out of the massive hole that had been created and gripped the ground by it, pulling Ichigo to his feet. There were still no wounds, but then even if there had been they would have just been healed instantly. Ichigo's arm had already been regenerated as well. An enemy who could heal themselves was truly a terrifying opponent. Ichigo glanced at his sword in the distance before he flicked his wrist, the sword flying from its position on the ground towards his hand. Shinji moved rapidly with Shunpo, trying to intercept Ichigo before his sword reached him. The effort was in vain. Just as Shinji reached Ichigo was the sword there, both swinging wildly at one another. The force of the blows blew some of the rubble around them back, both trying to press the advantage. Shinji knew he was running out of luck when a kick hit his stomach, Ichigo's knee sending him back as the sword flashed through the air. A faint hesitation in the blow was all that stopped the blade from bisecting him in half, instead merely slicing across the skin of his chest. Collapse, Sakanade. His blade changed and he wasted no time in getting his ability active, forcing Ichigo into the inverted world. It gave him more time to plan when Ichigo wasn't sure of which direction was correct to attack in. Ichigo had hesitated. Why had he hesitated? Could Ichigo already be reaching for the surface? No. That was impossible at the moment. The hollow was too firmly in control for Ichigo to wrestle control back at the moment. He'd know it when Ichigo was fighting back. The movements of the hollow form would get slower. They'd be weaker as the power being channeled slowly got drawn back in. What Ichigo had done, however, was that he had hesitated in his attack. Why would a hollow hesitate? What could make sure a creature try and show mercy? Unless it wasn't only Ichigo fighting back. His Zanpakuto could be desperately trying to help out too, and that might be enough to keep him alive. He saw Ichigo rapidly charging up a Zero attack, and he saw that his friend had managed to guess his location. It would happen when all other directions had been tried, the marks of a Zero present along each other path. He shot to the side, the blast singeing him as it passed. With a rapidly few bursts of Shunpo, he was at Ichigo, even with the attempts of Ichigo with Sonido to get the first move. Steel met steel as their blades clashed, Shinji aiming a finger forward with his free hand as he held out against Ichigo's strength. Hada number 4, Byakurai. The concentrated burst of lighting pierced the arrow and continued through the other side. Ichigo took a step backwards in pain and Shinji pressed his advantage, holding a clenched fist towards Ichigo. Red light gathered as quickly as it could in his palm, begging to escape as it trying to break out of his fist. So he let it. His own Zero may not be as powerful, but it was nothing to laugh at. It hit Ichigo dead on, the areas stopped by Ichigo's blade not halting its process. That was why he liked using it widespread. It didn't matter if you cut part of its path to blow it because it wouldn't stop the rest of it. The attack hit and he shot forward, swinging his sword at Ichigo. Even in the smoke from the attack, Ichigo still managed to react. It was too bad Sakanade was at work. He really loved his Zanpakuto sometimes. Ichigo's swipe was close, perhaps due to sheer luck, but it still missed without him having to even need to try and avoid the strike. His blade cut the flesh and he saw Ichigo react only for his blade to hit the complete wrong side. He didn't expect Ichigo's next move, however. Ichigo aimed at the ground and charged a Zero, firing it before Shinji could even react. The attack engulfed both of them, Shinji struggling out of the explosion of energy as quickly as he could. His mask was half destroyed, and a large array of burns covered his exposed skin. He glanced at his tattered shirt and sighed. It looked like he would need to get a new one after this was all over. He saw Ichigo as the rest of the energy vanished, not even bothering to have moved. He knew the energy would have done nothing to Ichigo, and unfortunately it had done a fair amount to him. He had felt his reserves take a massive hit as his magic had tried to protect him, and even then it still hadn't been enough. He couldn't fall for that trap again. Still, to do an attack like that was a perfect counter for his ability. It didn't matter if he reversed all directions if all of them were hit anyway. Ichigo had learned that once when he had gotten angry enough and used a large Getsuga Tenshou. He was surprised the Hollow in control knew about it too. Or maybe it had been just luck and instinct. Distance was the best course of action, especially with the damage he had just taken. He'd have to get a strong enough Bakuta to hold Ichigo, and it would require a good amount of what he had left. He just couldn't afford to get hit by enough of those zeros again. They were far too dangerous. So long as he kept moving, he'd be okay. Before he got the chance to move, however, a deadly blast of magic smashed against his back, forcing him to the ground. He tried to respond in time to the second attack, but he had focused too much of his concentration of Ichigo and nothing else. He wasn't able to stop the elbow as it collided with his head, smashing him against the ground. He did cry out a bit in pain, however, as a large blast of energy smashed against him. It seemed Ichigo hadn't let the attacker get away with interfering. However, that resulted in a large zero being blasted right at both of them, and the newcomer had dodged without bothering to pull him out of the way. His grip on his sword grew weak and it lay motionless at his side, its form changing back to that of its sealed appearance. His mask vanished and he felt his eyes getting heavily, dragging him into the land of unconsciousness. He still trying to keep them open, using all the effort he had left to spot who the newcomer had been. He recognized the coat that Brain had been wearing, but the hair was styled differently, and the eyes were red now. His last thing he managed to think was how happy the man looked as he glanced around him at all the destruction that had been caused. And then his eyes shut and he knew no more. Zero stepped over the body of the Shinigami, a wide smile on his face. For once he didn't care about the fact that someone still had a form that he hadn't destroyed yet. He couldn't help but stare at Ichigo, a mad look in his eyes. Yes. Look at you. Perfection. He laughed. I can't believe such a being like you exists in this world. You even went so far as to attack your own friends and allies. You are truly everything Brain believed you to be and more. Ichigo tilted his head, his eyes scanning Zero. Zero could feel the hostile magic, trying to see how much of a threat he would be. Trying to see if he was worth of fighting and destroying. We're a lot alike. I would love to destroy you, but I see what Brain wanted. You and I, together, side by side. We'll destroy the entire world. You can feast for an eternity on the destruction, and the fun will never end. Our desires can reach unimaginable heights. What do you say? Ichigo roared, the sound echoing around them and forcing Zero to take a sudden step back. His smile widened as he realized why he had done so. Fear. He had never felt it before. It was subtle, but he loved it. It was so incredible to feel. He brought his arm up, a shield of energy appearing around his arm and blocked the sudden strike from Ichigo. So it seemed his generous offer had been refused. That was no problem. If anything, it was even better. He'd get to fight someone who loved destruction just as much as he did, and he would get an incredible thrill from doing so. Destroying Ichigo in the end would be so much more thrilling. An annoying thought crossed his mind, originating from what made up Brain. So his other half wanted his pet alive, did he? It wouldn't be as much fun, but he supposed it would be interesting to train Ichigo. The fun they could have once the beast listened to him would be wonderful. With his other arm, he swung it round at Ichigo, a blast of energy firing from it. It was similar to what Brain could do with Dark Capriccio, but Brain wasn't him right now. His control and power was far greater. He swung the beam like a whip, smashing Ichigo away from him and drawing blood from the flesh of the skin it crashed against. It seemed the supposed arrow a hollow had wasn't enough to stop his attack. But then what else could be expected from a piercing type of magic? It was made to break through barriers. He had used it on the pesky barrier around Nirvana and had managed to create a small hole to slip through before it repaired itself. It had annoyed him that he couldn't destroy it, but he'd get another chance later on. A bright light appeared from where Ichigo had fallen, blasting the smoke away as the magic gathered. The Zero rapidly formed between the horns and fired, Zero not showing an intention of moving even as the attack rocketed towards him. He simply raised a hand and clenched it. It took less than a second for the complex array to form on the Zero before it detonated, shattering the Zero before it even reached halfway between the two of them. Ichigo shot straight through the remains of the Zero, using Sonido to rapidly approach his enemy. Zero predicted the incoming attacks and blasted a quick burst of magic from his feet, using it to rapidly move away from each swing of Ichigo's sword. He swung his hands down at Ichigo, orbs of darkness being sent flying at Ichigo with a few making contact and blasting the hollow back. Zero landed on the ground lightly, a barrier of energy appearing behind him to hold the blade back. This speed kept surprising him in how fast it was. He would have thought Ichigo would have been held back more going by the previous attack. The shield cracked, and Zero rolled to the side just as the barrier was smashed through. Ichigo's sword continued down, crashing into the ground and weakening the earth they were standing on. Zero took his chance, bringing both hands up and smashing them against the weakened earth. Cracks spread out from the point of impact before it broke apart, the increased gravity from his dark gravity attack causing it to fall down below. He could already see it smashing through the next few floors before continuing down till it broke the base of Nirvana itself. Ichigo still stood there though, floating on the air. He couldn't have that. Before Ichigo could attack, he summoned up 2 blasts of Dark Capriccio and used them as whips to smash against Ichigo from above. Combined with the remains of the dark gravity spell meant that even the technique Ichigo was using to remain in the air couldn't stop his descent. Zero launched himself after him, energy gathering around his fists. Ichigo turned in midair and prepared to swipe back at him, but he quickly acted, smashing his fists against Ichigo's chest. The energy around his fists was released, the twin waves of darkness increasing the attack's force dramatically. He kept up with the attack even as they sped to the ground, smashing Ichigo against it with his attack. At the last moment he used an adapted version of his dark gravity spell to lower his own gravity, just enough so that he wouldn't get hurt from the fall he had taken. It helped that he had used Ichigo as a shield to take the brunt of the damage. He laughed once more. He couldn't help it. This was so much fun. He had released so much of his magic and his opponent wasn't even dead yet. He could keep attacking and he wouldn't have to worry about Brain getting annoyed at his pet being destroyed. A hand suddenly gripped his arm and he felt a burst of pain as claws ripped into his skin. The pain didn't matter much to him. If anything, it gave him an even bigger thrill. But he couldn't afford to lose his arm. He still liked having it after all. He pulled back, ignoring the additional pain as he forced the claws to rip out of his skin painfully as he made his escape. He slashed down with his other arm, focusing a large amount of power into the beam as he sliced across Ichigo. The beam ripped the Hollow's arm clean off and sliced away a good chunk of the flesh on Ichigo's chest. Zero felt even more glee as he saw the wounds instantly start regenerating. Form that he could destroy forever and it would still return for him to do so again? Ichigo was truly incredible. He had to have him. "You'll need to be locked away for a while," Zero muttered. "I'll train you nice and well, just so long as you can survive your time in nothing." Darkness rapidly grew from the ground towards Zero's hands, thousands of horror-stricken phantom faces making up the energy he was drawing in. Genesis Zero. The attack flew at Ichigo, the thousands of phantoms gripping onto Ichigo wherever they could and began trying to absorb him completely from sheer numbers. Zero laughed as he watched Ichigo slowly disappear under the mass amounts of beings devouring him. Genesis Zero can erase anything in this world. Even so far as to remove a soul and a very existence. Survive this and prove to me how incredible you truly are. He watched as the phantoms slowly faded away to nothing, barely a dozen left. He sighed, turning away. It seemed his fun was over. Ichigo wasn't breaking Fr. He spun back round, just in time to see a blast of light breaking through the remaining phantoms and tearing a hole in the pocket dimension. Genesis Zero took things too. The light continued through, blasting against Zero as he took the full brunt of a Zero blast. Ichigo stepped out of the dimension, it snapping shut behind him. Zero smiled as the smoke cleared. Excellent. More. Let's have some more fun. He clenched his hand, a self-destruction spell appearing over Ichigo's chest before activating immediately. It ripped a massive hole in his chest and blasted away the two arms, barely any skin to hold its head to its body. The regeneration was already at work, ignoring the arms in favor of repairing the drastic damage done to the chest before Ichigo died from it. Zero used that time to rush in, grabbing Ichigo's own blade and swiping it across one of Ichigo's legs. The blade cut through easily, Ichigo falling backwards as Zero brought the blade up above his head. He swung it down, but Ichigo's remaining leg shot up, the claws digging into Zero's skin before launching him away. The wounds on Ichigo's chest finished healing and the magic began work on getting an arm back. Zero pushed his advantage, firing a large burst of darkness at Ichigo. The regeneration stopped for a moment as magic got diverted to another purpose, a Zero quickly growing between the horns and firing straight at the incoming attack. The arm quickly continued regeneration, coming up in time as Zero burst through the smoke. The sword tried to strike at Ichigo, but it suddenly shot to the side, Zero's grip on it being broken as the sword broke free and flew to its master's call. Ichigo gripped the blade tightly, swinging at Zero, who had gotten too close. The blade cut into his chest and Zero held back a grunt as he felt it rip across his flesh. A leg kicked out Zero's and he realized it was the missing one of Ichigo's, now regrown. He fell backwards, falling to the ground, but he didn't hit it. Ichigo moved extremely fast, bringing his other leg round as the first hit the floor to kick him away, the claws ripping more of his flesh. Zero felt bones break as he smashed against the trees. He struggled to his feet, his eyes glancing up as he saw Ichigo approaching. All his wounds were healed, and he still didn't look tired. "You're amazing," muttered Zero, taking a step forward as he stretched an arm out towards Ichigo. His body screamed at him as the pain intensified, his wounds all telling him to stop. But he couldn't. He loved every minute of this. "I can keep going. Don't stop fighting me here. We still have form. We still have power. This won't ever end until one of us no longer exists." Ichigo was more than happy to oblige. One hand shot out and grabbed Zero by his head, the other held the sword and swung, the lower half on Zero's body falling to the ground as the blade cut through his chest. Zero smiled, his eyes holding nothing but madness in them even as his body shut down. "Wonderful." Ichigo glanced at the remains of the body before chucking it to the ground, the interest in holding it lost. He brought his sword up over the body, the tip of the blade directly at Zero's neck. He slowly started lowering the blade, even though his body tried to restrict his movements. The blade was mere millimeters away from the neck when a tight grip wrapped itself around Ichigo's wrist. "Enough. Protector of the Fairies." The cloaked figure gently landed on the topmost level of Nirvana, entering the king's summit. He spared a glance at the symbol of Nirvana before turning away, focusing his attention on the throne and the pedestal in front of it. "This must be where he sat," muttered the man. "The great King Ribal, leader of the ancient Nervite tribe. I wonder what it was like." The man stared around him as he approached the throne, looking at the view. He could see all across Nirvana here and beyond, seeing the barrier in the distance. He glanced at the open gate above Nirvana before he flicked his wrist. The gate slowly closed until it snapped shut, the barrier completely secure once more. If no one had gotten out of the top before when they needed to, then it would be too late now. Since the barrier was still up, though, he'd have to assume the Shinigami holding the barrier up outside would still be okay. "You. Why are you here?" The man turned as he heard the voice, pleased to note that the staff he saw looked afraid. It truly was interesting to see stuff like this, as he hadn't ever come across a talking staff before. However, he wasn't in the mood right now. He had already seen everything he needed to the first time he had met Oration Cease. "I'm afraid this is your end," he said quietly as he drew his sword from his cloak. The staff slowly started backing away from Nirvana's controls, nothing but terror being shown. "Please. Please no." The staff kept moving back, begging the man to not get any closer. The man suddenly vanished and Clodua felt himself hit something. He glanced upwards, seeing the man's face looking down on him. "I'm sorry. You've seen too much here." Lighting shot from the orb in the staff, hitting the man dead on. Clodagh had no time to celebrate, however, as the man was completely unharmed as the smoke cleared. "I'm too strong for you to stop." The man swung his sword, slicing through the staff with ease and destroying it and the lacrima it was powered by in one swift movement. He took his sword and resheathed it away in his cloak, turning his attention back to the throne. He suddenly felt himself stopping. He tried moving again before he stopped, confused of why for a moment. It quickly clicked as he stared at the throne and the pedestal more closely, his eyes cold and calculative as they observed every detail he could see. "You know, you're really quite impressive," he spoke aloud, no one around to hear his ramblings. He took a step forward and this time he wasn't stopped. It was quite subtle magic that had held him back, but he could ignore it now that he knew what it was doing. The magic wasn't a defense anyway. It was a warning. He took another step, and then another, and then another. Moving forward, focusing on doing just that and why he wanted to do that. He finally reached the edge of the throne, the pedestal at his left. The urge to try and sit on the throne was tempting. It was really tempting. The power Rubal must have felt as he sat in this seat must have been tremendous. It wasn't anything to do with magical power, even though he knew from the legends that the ancient ruler of the Nervits had been something described as a god. Not even dragons had dared attack Nirvana at its peak, and stuff like that had always interested him when he was younger. The power Rubal had over the people though must have been tremendous. It took more than power to sit on a throne. You needed the support of the people, and all records of Nervite people said that Rubal had that. He was a beloved king to them, and he had loved them all in return and had protected them from harm. It was a shame such a mighty civilization had fallen all those years ago. 400 years had passed since then, and so many great civilizations no longer existed. Since the disappearance of Zeref, no new power like them had ever emerged. Even the Magic Council was nothing compared to the incredible powers the ancient civilizations had possessed. He wished he could see them in their original glory, but all he had left was faint records and legends. He realized he had suddenly taken a step towards the throne while he had been distracted before moving back slightly. He turned his attention to the pedestal, staring at the orb positioned in the very peak of it. He could sense the incredible power coming from it, unlike anything else in this world. "How did they make you?" he asked, reaching towards the orb. It was certainly a lacrima, but it was unlike any other he had ever seen or even theorized. Such massive amounts of energy stored within, and yet it didn't break, and that wasn't even considering his other theory on what it contained. He'd have to see how it would all play out in the end. His hand was about to make contact with the lacrima when he stopped, seeing the symbol of Nirvana flash into existence on the top of it. He smiled, nodding his head slightly as he reached out for it again. "I need to borrow you here. My precious student is in a bit of trouble because of you and I need to return him back to normal. You'll assist me, won't you?" He grabbed the orb and lifted it from the pedestal, all the runes and screens around the summit going dark and vanishing. Nirvana froze, the limbs holding it up locking into place. He felt the great machine come to a halt before looking down at the lacrima in his hands. "Let's go then. Protector of the Fairies." Ichigo tilted his head, looking at the newcomer with a growl. Jura didn't flinch, staring Ichigo down. "I said enough. I have no quarrels with you killing enemies, but I won't let you cross this line. He's already dead. I won't let you mutilate his body any further." Ichigo growled more, trying to force the blade closer to Zero's neck. Jura tightened his grip as well, slowly forcing Ichigo's arm up. It was finally too much for Ichigo to ignore, so he instead struck out at Jura, letting his arm go slack in order for Jura to pull him towards himself. Jura realized something was wrong as soon as he felt the loss of resistance, and it was the only thing that saved his life. He pulled back and released his grip, the blade missing him by inches as it swung past his face. Ichigo jumped at him, attempting to slice him into pieces for interrupting him. The earth rose, catching the blade against it and, to Ichigo's surprise, it didn't break. The earth held strong, Jura's will and power refusing to let it crumple against the force against it. At the same time, sharp spikes launched from the earth, piercing into Ichigo's flesh as they pushed him away. Jura raised his staff, the earth moving with it as he swung the staff around his head. The earth spun around him, forming a large snake-like construct of stone and earth. He shot out with his staff, aimed forward at where Ichigo suddenly leaped out from. The earth responded instantly, the snake above him lunging at Ichigo and tightening around him. Jura slammed his staff against the ground, 3 large pillars of stone rising up around Ichigo at angles aimed above his friend. They all converted at the point before walls extended around them to connect the pillars further. Jura stared Ichigo, both unmoving as their gazes locked. Ichigo wasn't even trying to struggle as the last bit of light shone through before the walls completely connected, leaving Ichigo trapped within a triangular-based pyramid. The staff came back up, a large piece of earth levitating off the ground and rising above the pyramid itself before Jura slammed the staff back against the ground. The large chunk of earth crashing against the pyramid and breaking through with ease. He heard a howl as it hit where Ichigo had to be and shattered, the rest of the earth barriers crumbling into rubble and piling on top of Ichigo. His plan was working. It had taken him a while to find Ichigo after he had retrieved his staff, and he had been almost believed that he would never find him. But in the end he had. It had been surprisingly easy. He was almost at Nirvana when he saw the explosions, and the sudden falling stone of Nirvana helped identify where Ichigo and his opponent had landed. He had arrived just in time to see Ichigo bisect his opponent, and he still wasn't sure on who the man was. Even if the man had been an enemy, he couldn't let what Ichigo had been about to do happen. Not only for the sake of the dead but for Ichigo himself. Ichigo would never do such a horrific thing, and he would have hated himself for the rest of his life if he had mutilated someone's body. It fitted with the image of a hollow, however. No mercy and no morals. He hadn't been sure if the hollow side had wanted to eat the man or to take a trophy. Ichigo suddenly attacking him because he stopped him also fit in that image. To Ichigo, he wasn't a friend. He was just another enemy to fight. Another person to kill. It was sad to see what a state Ichigo had been reduced to, and it hurt even more to know he had done it for their sake. He had tried to save them all from Nirvana, and had ended up being the intended target in the first place. It had to be eating him up inside. So it was his job to pull Ichigo back to the surface. "Can you hear me, Ichigo?" There was no response, so Jura tried again. "Ichigo? It's me. Jura. Your friend." He took a step forward, approaching the rubble. "I know you're in there somewhere, Ichigo. You need to fight this. This is not you. This is not the Ichigo we all know and love. You can hear my voice, I know you can. If this darkness is enough to silence you, then how can you protect anyone?" A blade shot out of the rubble, Jura's staff hastily coming up to defend himself. The point hit the middle of the staff's pole and he felt the wood shake in his hands. Even as reinforced as the staff was, it was still weak. The blade had almost pierced straight through. He knew the staff wouldn't last much longer. Ichigo lunged out of the rubble, swiping at Jura with his sword. Jura brought his arm up, a shield of earth bursting from the ground and intercepting the blade. Jura stepped away from it just in time as the blade broke through, swiping at where he had been. "You have to do better than that to beat me, Ichigo." Jura aimed his index and middle fingers at Ichigo, the earth rising around him. Unlike his normal spells, the earth actually began to changing into a construct like when he had made the snake. It rapidly changed until it looked like a large fist and arm with armor along it. Ichigo saw the fist incoming and brought up his blade to defend himself, the fist crashing against the blade and sending Ichigo flying back. Another fist shot out of the ground and intercepted Ichigo's path, sending him flying back to the original before the two fists collided with one another. This time he didn't wait to call out to Ichigo, summoning more earth to surround Ichigo and crush him into the ground. Before the attack connected, however, it was blown away. Ichigo flew out of the hole he had created in the fists, clearing the distance between the two in moments. The blade flew round and smashed through the staff, Jura barely managing to dodge the blade. The blade came straight back round, however, and sliced at his chest. As Jura relied back, he frowned. He felt the blade cut across his flesh, but it was too faint. He felt the pain from it, but the blade should have gone deeper. Did Ichigo hesitate? Had he heard his voice? A fist rammed into him and sent him tumbling backwards, the staff's remains falling from his hands. Ichigo took the opportunity to charge a Zero between his horns, aiming it straight towards the recovering mage. Jura watched as the attack charged up before slamming his hands together just as it fired. Rock Mountain. The earth rose around him and quickly shaped into an large humanoid figure of some kind around him, elaborate armor covering the figure with parts of the rock sticking out as protrusions. The hands of the rock guardian were pressed together just like Jura's was, as if in prey to block the attack. The attack fired and hit Jura's defense, the rock cracking on impact. However, it didn't break. Jura poured his magic into the spell, ensuring his defense would not fall. He may not have been as strong as Ichigo was, or as fast, but he had devoted so much time to one aspect that fitted best with his magic. Defense. He had held back the demon attacking the city all those years ago until Ichigo and his friends had arrived, and he had only gotten stronger since then. He wouldn't let an attack like this break his barrier, no matter how strong it was. The attack finally let up and his shield crumbled around him, both fighters watching the other. He tried calling out once more to Ichigo. "You stopped back then. You should have managed to reach my internal organs with that strike. Instead you hesitated. You pulled back at the last second, and gave me the chance to avoid most of the damage. Why?" Ichigo didn't answer, instead just gripping the sword more fiercely. "Why did you stop?" "Because you wished to not harm me. I know you can hear me, Ichigo." Ichigo shot forward, slicing at Jura. Pillars of earth shot out of the ground all around Ichigo, trapping his limbs and halting his movement as Jura walked towards him. He could see they wouldn't hold for long, but he needed this moment. He was sure Ichigo could hear his voice. He kept walking till he was almost in front of Ichigo, making sure to keep enough distance between him and the sword as to not get hit by any surprise attacks. "Ichigo. Come back to us, Ichigo. This is not you." He didn't see any response. And then there was a glimmer of something. Understanding. He smiled as Ichigo turned his head towards him, his mouth opening as he tried to force words out. "Save. The others are safe, Ichigo. Don't worry." "No. Save." Jura caught on. "Don't worry. I'll help you break free of this. We all will." "No. Not me. Don't save me." Ichigo roared, the light of recognition fading from his eyes. "Stop me. Save. Ichigo." Jura froze, hearing the words Ichigo was saying. Save Ichigo? Wasn't this Ichigo? If not, then who had forced control just then? Who was in control, and why did they want to stop if they weren't Ichigo? Ichigo suddenly broke free, Jura barely dodging the blade as it swung at his head. More pillars pummeled into Ichigo, smashing him into the ground as he moved back. If it wasn't Ichigo at the surface trying to fight back, then it was harder to call out to him that he thought it would be. He needed to make sure Ichigo couldn't harm anyone else right now until that man arrived. Had that man understood from the start? He had said particularly to survive until he got there. Did he already know that trying to reason with Ichigo would be useless? Did he know that someone else was trying to fight back? That posed the question. Was it Ichigo who was hesitating, or the person he had just spoken to? He would get his answers later if needed. For now he had to try and finish this. He ran back to where his staff had fallen, his eyes glancing at the rubble as parts of it got blown away. Ichigo was really trying to break free there, and he doubted the earth he had trapped him in would hold him forever. His staff was in pieces, but the top half was all he needed. He picked it up, holding it just above where it had been cut at. The lacrima on top glowed brightly as he began building up the magic for what he wanted to do. It would take some time to prepare, so he would have to survive until it was ready for use. The last of the rubble got blasted away and Ichigo clawed his way out of it, charging at Jura. Spears and pillars of earth rose to block his path, so he instead blasted through them with a Zero, charging as fast as he could at Jura. He vanished with Sonito, appearing behind Jura and swinging. Jura saw the attack and blocked it with a stone wall, allowing the wall to fire off small restraints to grab Ichigo with. He quickly placed his hands together, the staff in between the two. I haven't used this much, so let's see how well it works. Rumbling MT Fuji. The ground exploded upwards, a massive blast of energy being released where Ichigo stood as it ripped apart the landscape in its path. The blast was even bigger than Ichigo's Zero had been, and Jura could hear a howl of pain as his attack intensified. The blast slowly stopped and he stepped away, keeping up his guard. It may have been more powerful than Ichigo's Zero, but he didn't have the same amount of magic that other wizard saint did. He had a lot, but Ichigo had been firing a ton of these Zeros before even fighting him. Something was definitely up with that. Going by how much magic was in each Zero, and combined with how much magic Ichigo had left after blocking Nirvana, this was way beyond how much magic Ichigo should have had left. And he doubted he was drawing energy in like before. Just where was this impossible amount of power coming from? He saw Ichigo step out of the remains of the blast before it fades away, a large amount of burns along his body with a chunk of his body destroyed alongside it. There had likely been more damage, but he could already see Ichigo's regeneration at work. With the unknown source of energy combined with the healing rate, he wasn't sure how much longer he would be able to hold out. His reserves of magic were already starting to drop, especially after using that spell. Well. What do we have here? Jura glanced as the man he had met before landed next to him, spotting a smile on the man's face. You have a way to revert Ichigo back. The man held up a small lacrima. Of course. Right here. I don't know how long it will take, and the speed issue is a problem, so would you mind just smashing Ichigo against the ground for a moment? Just do enough damage to make him focus on his regeneration above everything else. You better be right about this. Jura stepped forward, glancing at the lacrima at the end of his staff. It was done charging. He had the energy he needed for the spell. He slowly brought the earth up around him, Ichigo letting him as he healed his injuries. The earth slowly shaped itself until it formed an arm like before. This time though the earth continued to mold itself into something else. In the hand of rock formed a large sword, the edge sharp just like a real blade. He had never made his attacks in preparation to attack someone originally. He had been satisfied with the defense aspect of it all those years ago. But something had changed after meeting Ichigo and his friends. Seeing their potential had made him want to compete. But if he always focused on defense, then he would never win. Rumbling MT Fuji had been his first creation after Simple Spikes, but he didn't stop there. He had kept training, trying to find the answer he sought for his strength. And then he had found it one day. It had been pure chance. He had met Ichigo's friend Levi during those 3 years, asking if she had heard anything of him. She hadn't, but she had asked for his assistance in observing a technique she had been working on. Solid script, Kakawa. He had been amazed when he had seen it. Even with the brief moment she had been able to summon it for, it had been incredible. Tremendous power packed within the single spell, but she had said herself that she couldn't control it all with a single spell. She had many different things working together to make it work. That was what he had to do. He wasn't skilled enough yet to make a construct of this work as he wanted without help. The lacrima on his staff was the key to that. A simple levitation spell built into it, perfect to help keep the rocks together and to float in the air. And perfect for the next step. He brought his arm back and the stone arm followed his actions, the staff acting as the stone sword. This was the part he had never been able to do correctly before. Joint movement. And now that he could, the spell was complete. Tenkan. He swung his staff, the blade crashing down on Ichigo and smashing him into the ground. The cloaked man was already moving as the blade descended, hurrying to Ichigo's side. He saw that Ichigo's arm had been ripped completely off and that the rock sword was digging into Ichigo's side, pinning him to the ground. Ichigo was already trying to regeneration the damage, but he wouldn't stop him in time. The damage Jura had done was more than he had anticipated. The man stood above Ichigo before placing the lacrima against Ichigo's chest, the orb glowing brightly as it touched him. Both mages shielded their eyes as the light shone on Ichigo, black and white energy covering Ichigo as it trying to reverse the previous effect of Nirvana. A small shift was felt in Ichigo's magical power, and that was all the man needed to know that it was working. The pale white skin broke into pieces, revealing the original color below. The mask shattered, Ichigo's hair shortening while his eyes returned to normal. The limbs rapidly regrew, but as normal limbs this time, the body parts still attached reverting as well. Even the hole in Ichigo's chest finally filled itself back in, and it was only as the light faded did both mages breathe in a sigh of relief. "Welcome back, Ichigo," muttered the man as he stepped away from Ichigo's body. "Sorry about all this." Ichigo's eyes glanced at him, trying to see who he was before he collapsed from the exhaustion he felt. He barely managed to say one word before he couldn't stay awake any longer. Kisuk. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.